Chapter 201, Barrett's Debut. The instant Charles's blade whistled through the air, Bundy Wald's form ballooned in size. A dark, crackling glow of armament Haki coated his scythe, the weapon's edge gleaming with ruthless intent. Charles met the attack head-on. Their blades collided with a sharp crack, and Bundy's scythe shattered into splinters under the overwhelming force of Charles's steel. No! Bundy staggered back, panic in his eyes. Before he could recover, Charles's sword sliced into Bundy's chest. Blood spurted across the deck as the wounded pirate let out a gurgling scream. All around, the Wald pirates froze, turning in horror. "Captain!" "Younger brother!" Guy Ram, Bin Jack, and the others cried out. On the fringes of the skirmish, Charles's crew pressed the advantage, keeping the Wald lieutenants off balance. Guy Ram was locked in combat with Carter, whose cube fruit powers made him a precarious foe. Blocks of hardened stone and floating barriers sprang up at every turn. Yet despite Carter's tricks, Guy Ram kept him pinned down. Had it not been for Guy Ram's relentless pressure, Carter might have broken through and wreaked havoc. Across the deck, Sebastian squared off against a new adversary, young Barrett. Though only 12, Barrett towered like a mythic giant, his body fused and reinforced by the fusion fruit, pushing his height close to 4 meters. Every inch of his massive frame was sheathed in armament Haki. With a roar, Barrett swung a colossal fist at Sebastian, the impact threatening to send shockwaves through the entire ship. As Bundy Wald lay bleeding and his crew reeled, it was clear the tide had turned. In the face of Charles's fearless assault and the astonishing power of Barrett's debut, the Wald pirates had met their match. With the combined devil fruit's power unleashed, a colossal giant, over 10 meters tall, loomed before them. Sebastian lay sprawled on the ground, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth, utterly helpless. In contrast, Barrett's chest heaved with exhilaration. A feral grin spread across his face as though each blow struck was a release of pent-up fury. Barrett hadn't set foot on an actual battlefield in years, and life had grown dull without real challenge. But Charles refused to let Barrett's talent stagnate, so every few days he'd spar with him. Over the last 4 years, Barrett's progress had been staggering. At first, the Navy codgers still offered some semblance of a contest. Before long, though, they hadn't even managed to make him break a sweat. And Charles's sparring sessions? Those weren't fights at all, but pure one-sided domination. As a result, Barrett had only a vague sense of his own limits. He knew he was stronger than ever, but by how much? Now, standing amid the battered remains of the Wald pirates, each fighter bearing a bounty over 1 million, Barrett finally had his answer. He had crushed them all, and in that realization, he understood the true magnitude of his power for the first time. Sebastian lay on the ground, trembling from Barrett's punch as he hacked out ragged coughs. Barrett shook off the last of his rage, the black military coat on his broad shoulders creaking with the movement. White gloves now smeared red, he stalked over to the fallen man. "Did you really think you could use me as your stepping stone to fame?" Barrett snarled. He grabbed Sebastian by the hair and yanked his head back. There was a sickening crack as Barrett twisted hard, Sebastian's skull giving way under the pressure. The victim slumped, eyes vacant, already dead. Barrett paused to wipe the blood from his glove, then scanned the battlefield. The Wald pirates had recruited over 200 men in recent years, and the crew Charles had assembled still fought fiercely. Barrett's lips curved into a cruel smile. "All right, then," he rumbled, cracking his knuckles until they popped. "Let me show you how it's done." In the next instant, his imposing frame blurred with impossible speed. He darted into the pirate ranks, seized 2 men by their collars, and hurled them at each other like rag dolls. One of the pirates struck his companion with a thunderous impact and died on the spot. Barrett didn't hesitate. He thundered into the pirate horde, fists and boots crashing into anyone who got in his way. For a heartbeat, the hundreds of cutthroats froze, amethyst light flickering across Barrett's gauntlets, before dumping their weapons and scrambling backward. But no one was fast enough. Barrett paused, scanning the scattering pirates with cold efficiency. Then, planting both hands on the wooden deck, he let loose a wave of thick, violet-hued fluid that slithered over the planks like living mud. "Golem form," he roared. In an instant, the deck buckled and heaved. From the churning mass rose an earth giant more than 10 meters tall, its body a seething blend of clay and stone. With one sweeping motion, the Colossus's palm slammed into the nearest pirate, sending him skidding across the floor like a rag doll. "Devil! It's a devil!" Terrified cries echoed as the giant smashed through the fleeing crew. Those caught in its path never saw a second blow. Somewhere on the fringes, a bloodied pirate spat out, This has to be the new wonderkind of the Rockefeller pirates." Thousands of miles away in his ornately carved office, News King Morgans watched the live feed, courtesy of his fastest newsbird, with growing disbelief. The image of the mud colossus filled his viewfinder. He pressed a trembling finger to the screen. "He's the devil's heir," Morgans murmured. He snapped his fingers. "Bring up Barrett's file." His aide complied, and Morgans scanned the dossier in silence. Then he read aloud, voice low but charged with revelation. "Barrett joined Charles's crew 4 years ago." Morgans leaned back in his gilded chair, eyes narrowing. "So that's why he's here." Charles hadn't expected that. In just 4 years, the 12-year-old Douglas Barrett would become this ferocious. His wild laughter rang out over the deck. "Aha! Ya! Douglas Barrett, the devil's heir, has arrived." Morgan could already picture tomorrow's newspaper. Rockefeller pirates prodigy annihilates Walled crew single-handedly. Indeed, Douglas had just dispatched every Walled pirate save their captain, Bundy Walled. With a single backhand, he sent a struggling deckhand sprawling, and that's when he noticed something odd. Several of these so-called pirates were far too strong for mere rogues, yet they wore the ragged uniforms of Walld's men. Barrett knelt beside one crumpled opponent, inspecting the pattern of a newly shaved scalp. Years of training under Charles had honed his instincts. He murmured to himself, "That's a Navy 6-style crop. Could they be undercover Marines?" His sharp eyes caught more clues, the precision cuts, the disciplined posture. He was half right, but not quite. These men weren't Marine spies. They were CP operatives, clandestine agents of the world government. Barrett's grin turned savage. "Undercover or not, you're all dead men walking." With that, the ground trembled. Barrett's devil fruit ability sprang to life as a colossal clay giant materialized behind him, roaring in challenge and ready to crush anyone foolish enough to stand in its way. Charles's hands flared with a menacing energy as he barreled toward the ragtag crew of pirates. "Assholes!" he roared. The pirates, actually CP0 agents in disguise, looked up at the towering figure with expressions of pure fury. Their bodies lurched and twisted in midair, unnerved by the sudden hostility. Their cover had been blown, thanks to Barrett's sharp eyes, and now their true mission lay exposed. They were CP0 operatives embedded within the Walled pirates, sent to coordinate with the Navy and strike down Bundy Walled at the decisive moment. Bundy Walled, nicknamed the World Breaker, was every bit as terrifying as his reputation suggested. Wielding the power of the Momo fruit, he had razed entire islands without a second thought, destroying kingdoms and sowing panic among the world government's members. His recent exploits in the New World outshone even the legendary Golden Lion, Shiki, in sheer devastation. Fearing what he might do next, the world government had quietly placed undercover agents among his ranks, precisely as he began recruiting fresh blood for his crew. Now, with Charles charging in and the CP0 agents unmasked, the stage was set for a showdown that could decide the fate of countless lives. Chapter 202, Bundy Walld's Death. Hidden deep within the Walled pirates' stronghold, traitors lurked, ready to stab their comrades in the back the moment the opportunity arose. None of it mattered, though. The Rockefeller pirates had already swept through, crushing every plot and scheme. Barrett observed the scrambling mutineers with contempt. They were agile, certainly, but hopelessly outmatched by his combined form. With a satisfied snort, he let his enhanced state fade. He planted his feet firmly on the deck, clenched his fists, and curled his lips into a cold, triumphant smile. A violet-blue aura of absolute dominance pulsed around him, a silent declaration of power that sent a wave of intimidation through the assembled pirates. Charles, standing nearby, felt the immense pressure radiating from Barrett. He turned his head, watching the display with a half-amused scoff. "He's just showing off," Charles murmured under his breath. Even Charles's own crew, known for their timidity, seemed galvanized by Barrett's arrogance. At the same time, Bundy Walled, who'd been sprawled on the deck not far from Charles, struggled to push himself up. The towering pirate was nearly 4 meters tall, but his youthful features betrayed his inexperience. As Bundy finally rose to his full height, he glanced across at Barrett's menacing stance and thought, "This kid may be powerful, but he's still green." Charles shook his head, watching Bundy's gaze flicker between awe and defiance. The stage was set for a brutal reckoning, one that would decide who truly held the power among pirates. "What a monster," Bundy Wald muttered as he struggled to his knees, glaring at Charles. Beside him, Barrett stood unabashedly, muscles rippling with his own triumphant aura. Suddenly, Bundy's gaze fell on a motionless figure slumped in the churned mud, a cobalt-blue coat streaked with blood. "Sebastian!" he cried, stumbling forward. The body was cold and lifeless. In an instant, fury and grief surged through Bundy. "Charles, I swear I'll make you pay for this." He pushed himself up, fists crackling with raw energy. His oldest comrade, the friend who'd stood by him from the North Sea to the New World, lay dead because of Charles's orders. Bundy roared, "You think you can kill my brother-in-arms and get away with it? Who the hell are you?" Charles met his glare with a serene smile. Raising the 7-star sword, he let the blade sing. In a single fluid motion, the steel arcs down, gouging the earth so deeply the ground split apart. "Die, you bastard!" Bundy screamed, throwing himself at the attack, his fist glowing with martial aura. With a thunderous impact, blade met aura. Bundy's arm buckled under the force. He was flung across the battlefield, rock and mud churning around him. He landed on his back, coughing up a fountain of dark blood. His weapons lay in splinters. The 7-star sword had ended them in one stroke. Disarmed and battered, Bundy rolled over, body trembling with pain. He forced a ragged laugh. "Is that the best you've got?" "As expected of the world's #1 swordsman," Bundy Wald gasped, the force of that slash clearing his head. He spun around, already plotting his escape. Run? He didn't get to decide that. Charles wouldn't allow it. The young swordsman had never shown mercy, and he wasn't about to start now. Bundy had been lurking around the old man's hideout for nearly 2 years, intercepting countless shipments. Letting him go now would be a disgrace to Charles's reputation as the world's greatest swordsman, one of the 4 legendary pirates, and captain of the Rockefeller Pirates. Demon Slash! A sliver of steel flashed in a perfect crescent, hurtling toward Bundy at an impossible speed. Winded and bruised from Charles's relentless assault, Bundy's reflexes were sluggish. Before he could even blink, the blade was on him. Arr! He let out a tortured scream and threw up his left arm to block, but Charles's demon slash tore through it like soft tofu. Not even the strongest Haki coating could stop the blade. "Charles Wah!" Ched Bundy Wald clutched his shattered left arm, pain etched on his face. "That was ruthless, Suzu," Charles called out. "You saved your skin by using your arm as a shield, and now you've lost it all." From the very first moment, Charles barely shifted. He poured every ounce of his sword's energy into one lethal sweep, like the scythe of death, leaving Bundy Wald utterly unable to defend himself. "This power, it's 100 times faster!" Bundy roared, blood splattering at his feet. Ignoring the agony where his arm once was, Bundy activated his devil fruit ability. In an instant, he streaked toward the docks, a furious comet racing for freedom. But at the quay's edge, Charles was already waiting. "Running away?" Charles asked coolly. "You'd rather stand and die than bow down?" Before Bundy could reply, Charles unleashed a burst of speed. Drawing on the 6th naval style, he sliced through the air so rapidly his blade left no trail, an almost invisible slash. Yet Bundy's acceleration was extraordinary. He darted around Charles's strike, hurtled aboard a nearby ship, and slammed his fist against the deck. "Brothers!" he howled to the startled crew. "I will avenge you." As the gangplank rattled under his weight, Bundy prepared to cut the mooring lines. Charles planted his feet on the dock, watching every move. "Revenge?" he called out across the water. "Tell me, why do you think you deserve it? Isn't it wonderful when a family stays nice and tidy?" Charles thought wryly as he materialized, silent and swift as a shadow, at the bow of Bundy Wald's flagship. His 7-star sword crackled with lightning, an unmistakable sign that he meant business. He knew this technique all too well. A single, devastating blow. "Demon sword, Badian," he intoned, voice echoing with the power of the Overlord's will. The blade lifted in a graceful arc, humming with energy, then slashed across Bundy Wald's face. A single, ragged scream broke from the older man's lips, but before he could utter a word of protest, the force of the strike overwhelmed him. Boom! The explosion rocked the entire port, and a great column of smoke spiraled into the sky. Charles stood unmoved as fiery embers danced across the deck. Then, with a slight shake of his head, he dissipated the sword's lingering aura. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left of Bundy Wald but a smoldering crater. No blood, no remains, just the void where a man had stood moments before. Charles had grown weary of theatrics and ended the affair in the most efficient way possible. In dying, Bundy Wald had also avoided 30 years behind bars, a mercy of sorts that he ought to appreciate. With the last wisps of smoke curling into the night, Charles pulled a cigarette from his coat, lit it, and drew a slow, contemplative drag. The port lay silent once more, bearing witness to his quiet, inexorable judgment. Chapter Text: Forging Tomorrow's Iron Pirates. Charles wiped the sweat from his brow and slid his blade back into its scabbard with a practiced gesture. Across the yard, Bundy Wald dropped to one knee, chest heaving. Even the world's greatest swordsman had been no match for Charles's precision today. "That's enough, Charles," called Irina from the edge of the training circle, arms folded. Her sterling reputation aboard the ship and her fierce protectiveness had earned her the crew's nickname, the Tigress. She glanced at her watch. "You've got drills at dawn. Get some rest." Charles offered a quick salute. He'd promised her he'd rein in his enthusiasm, but every fiber of his being craved another bout. Still, he knew better than to argue with her when she was worried he'd push himself too far. After Bundy retreated to catch his breath, Charles turned to the next group of officers waiting to spar. His gaze fixed on Barrett, a promising young lieutenant whose confidence barely masked his hunger for improvement. Barrett took his stance, blade at the ready. Their swords met in a flawless dance, parry, riposte, feint. Charles watched Barrett's form keenly, the straightness of his guard, the fluidity of his strike, the steadiness of his footwork. After a swift exchange, Charles stepped back and lowered his sword. "Well done," Charles said, clapping Barrett on the shoulder. "You're already fighting at an elite lieutenant general's level. In 2 years, you'll be a quasi-general. Give it another decade, and you'll command as a full general." Barrett's chest swelled with pride. He'd trained relentlessly to earn this praise, yet he sensed Charles saw untapped potential in him, something that might outshine his peers one day. As the other cadets gathered around, murmuring among themselves, Charles allowed a small, confident smile. These were the officers who would one day hold the line under his banner. And beyond them, he envisioned his own children, 3 future emperors, perhaps even 4, each molded in this very yard. Together, they would elevate the Rockefeller Pirates into the legendary Iron Pirates. A soft chuckle escaped him. Ironclad, unbreakable, unrivaled. "Huh?" Barrett's voice broke through his reverie, uncertain whether Charles addressed him or the echo of his own ambitions. Charles winked. "Rest up, all of you. Tomorrow, we begin again." He strode toward the barracks, every step echoing a promise. This was only the beginning. Could the world government have already planted undercover agents among the Wald pirates this early? Charles frowned, recalling that Bundy Wald had been arrested all the way back in 1491. Chapter 203, The Fall of the Wald Pirates. Charles watched in tense silence as Barrett, barely 12 years old, traded blows with a ring of world government agents masquerading as shabby pirates. Though their unassuming appearance fooled everyone at first, their mastery of the Navy's 6 styles fighting techniques betrayed them. Even Barrett's fierce aura slowed their reactions only momentarily. They quickly adjusted, flanking the boy with coordinated strikes. From the sidelines, an officer barked, "Enough! Let Barrett slog it out. If he can't handle them, so what?" The provincial command wanted a real challenge. With that, the other observers lost interest and turned away, leaving Charles alone at the edge of the battlefield. He frowned. Barrett was more than capable of defeating them one-on-one, but as a team, these agents danced around him with fluid teamwork that denied Barrett any opening. Watching Barrett forced back step by step, Charles realized the boys' only hope lay in breaking their formation. His attention snapped to Carter, Baron Wald's top lieutenant. Carter, an animal-type devil fruit user, had weathered the agent's assaults longer than most, but even his superhuman resilience was wearing thin. Guy Ram, the cube fruit user, pinned him with crushing geometric constructs. Carter staggered under every blow, unable to find purchase. Charles clenched his jaw. With a flick of his wrist, the seven-star sword materialized in his hand, its edge gleaming in the fading light. He lunged into the clearing, blade aimed straight for Guy Ram's midsection. "I won't let you overwhelm him," Charles shouted, voice cutting through the chaos like steel. In that instant, the tide of battle began to shift. A brilliant emerald arc sliced through the earth, gouging a deep trench as it bore down on Charles. For years, he had served as the Walled Pirates' premier fighter under Captain Bondi Wald, his instincts honed, his presence commanding. Yet even his battle-worn senses couldn't fully prepare him for the lightning-quick strike that came hurtling from nowhere. Impossible to dodge, Charles thought, panic flaring in his mind as his limbs froze. In the same instant, Carter vaulted forward. Charles could only watch in stunned silence as the green blade found its mark. Carter collapsed without a sound, a jagged wound stretching from his chest to his thigh, the air filled with the metallic tang of blood. Shaking, Carter forced himself upright. His face was ashen, sweat mingling with crimson. Crawling toward Charles, he managed a broken apology. "Boss, I let you down." Charles knelt beside him and gently lifted his chin. "You protected me," he said quietly, pressing a steadying hand to Carter's shoulder. "Rest now. Regroup." He rose and pointed past Carter's fallen form to a jagged boulder. In its shadow crouched a short, wiry man, Binjack, his eyes flashing with intent. Charles drew a steady breath, resolve hardening his features. Then there's only one more to deal with. With that, he advanced toward Binjack, every step carrying the weight of a pirate who would never back down. Charles's eyes widened as the world shifted around him. In an instant, his body contorted, bones and sinews rearranging until, where he once stood, now stood a powerful zebra. Before Binjack could even draw breath, the beast lashed out. One thunderous kick sent the pirate leader crashing into the gravel, his body lying lifeless amid the scattered stones. With a crackling swirl of energy, Charles snapped back into his human form. He surveyed the aftermath. Every member of the Walled Pirates lay defeated, all but one. At the far edge of the dock, a slender woman knelt beside the open hull of their ship, her fingers tracing the wood as if seeking a secret latch. "You move another muscle," Charles warned, "and I promise you a miserable death." Startled, the woman scrambled backward. "No, please, don't come any closer. I'm just the ship's doctor." Her name was Niken, and Charles recognized why she lingered even after her crew's downfall. Rumor said her Chinese medicines could halt and even reverse the ravages of time. Such talent was too valuable to waste. Charles relaxed his stance. "I have a better offer. Join the Rockefeller Pirates. Your skills would be appreciated." Relief and excitement flickered across Niken's face. She dropped her tools and rose to her full height. "Thank you. Yes, I'll join you. Right now." Eager not to let her talent slip away, Charles nodded once. The promise of fresh allies and the means to keep them young had just brightened the Rockefeller Pirates' prospects. The battle was almost over. The remaining Walled Pirates, fresh recruits with little real combat experience, had been cut down one after another by the veteran Rockefeller Pirates. There was simply no contest against the hardened fighters who'd served under Charles for the past 4 or 5 years. Even the Cypher Paul agents Barrett had tangled with began to break into a cold sweat. In the chaos, Barrett seized his moment. He swung both fists like twin storms, smashing through the panicked enemies in a single devastating assault. "Captain!" Barrett called out, breath ragged as he approached Charles. His uniform lay in tatters from the fight, exposing the rippling muscles beneath. Charles nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "Outstanding work." Barrett's face lit up at the praise. Though Charles often dismissed his techniques as child's play, they were nothing short of extraordinary for a boy of 12. Few warriors that age could match that raw power. After all, when Charles himself was 12, he hadn't even crossed over yet. Barrett's grin widened at the thought. Nearby, Carter, another member of Charles's crew, stood silently, shoulders slumped in frustration. He had nothing to say. Charles knew just how formidable Barrett had become, far beyond his capabilities now, and even more terrifying than Charles himself had been as a child. He could only wonder what heights Barrett would reach in the years to come. At the same time, Carter couldn't help but admire Charles's foresight. Charles had anticipated Barrett's arrival on their ship long before it happened, thanks to intelligence he'd received from Paul. "Let's pack up," Charles ordered his crew. "With the walled pirates wiped out, there's no one left here who can trouble us. Raise our flag on this island. It'll serve as a temporary supply and transit station for the Rockefeller pirates." True to form, Charles left the detailed work in the hands of specialists. A small detachment of guards was left behind to secure the outpost, while the bulk of the crew, along with Charles himself, sailed away. As the last sails unfurled, the ship's newsbird took flight, carrying word of the battle to the far corners of the New World. By the following morning, the headlines were everywhere, from the Grand Line to the Coral and Silver Seas. "World breaker Bundy Wald slayed," they proclaimed. "The walled pirates have been annihilated by the Rockefeller fleet in a single, crushing blow." The latest issue of Morgan's Gazette exploded onto newsstands worldwide with two earth-shaking reports. 1. The Rockefeller pirates' Devil's Heir, Douglas Barrett, makes his dazzling debut. 2. Navy heroes strike again, captured, responsible for Admiral Zifa's family massacre. The second article delves deeply into every detail of the engagement, including the breathtaking climax delivered by Charles Rockefeller himself. Readers learned that upon reaching an unnamed island in the New World, Charles, the world's #1 swordsman and captain of the Rockefeller pirates, challenged and swiftly defeated Bundy Wald, the notorious world breaker who had terrorized these seas for the past 3 or 4 years. Far from a mere demonstration of brute force, smashing mountains, as some exaggerated reports claimed, it was a true duel of blades and skill. With only a handful of precise, lightning-fast strikes, Charles ended Bundy's reign of terror. Witnesses describe the scene as almost surreal. One moment, Bundy's massive frame dominated the battlefield. The next, he lay mortally wounded, his invincible reputation shattered. This victory didn't just snuff out a fearsome pirate, it solidified Charles Rockefeller's legend all over again. Swordsmen and seafaring adventurers from every corner of the globe are electrified by the news. If anyone doubted the captain's prowess, this battle leaves no room for question. Charles stands unsurpassed. As Morgan's Gazette puts it, the New World has seen countless battles, but few as decisive, few as elegant, and few that will be remembered as long as this one. Chapter 204, Justice Will Prevail, Grand Line's first half, Karaigana Island. In a dimly lit tower room of the island's castle, an 8-year-old boy with tightly curled hair and keen hawk-like eyes sat at a rough wooden desk. He held a newspaper in one hand. Beside it lay a simple wooden dagger he'd carved himself. The front page headline screamed, "World's Greatest Swordsman, Rockefeller Charles, Slays Bundy Wald." The boy's gaze locked onto Rockefeller Charles's stern portrait. All around him, the walls were plastered with newspaper clippings featuring the legendary swordsman. And in the center hung a fresh bounty poster declaring, "World's Greatest Swordsman, Rockefeller Charles." "I'll surpass you one day," the boy whispered, carefully folding the paper and tucking it into his satchel. He lifted his wooden dagger, stood, and slipped out of the chamber. Moments later, a rush of wind echoed through the corridor as the castle doors swung open. Marineford, Navy Headquarters. Meanwhile, at the heart of Marineford's naval base, admirals and senior officers gathered solemnly around 2 freshly dug graves. White-gloved Marines carried a pair of plain coffins, setting them gently into the earth. Admiral Zephyr, known by many as Fujitora, stood before one of the graves, normally composed features betrayed by eyes red with sorrow. Around him, the Navy brass bowed their heads in respectful silence, grief and grief's promise of justice hanging heavy on the breeze. Zifa's eyes glittered fiercely. Tears long since dried left them sharp and haunted. He summoned the naval contingent with a single icy command, "Lower the coffin." Without hesitation, the sailors began shoveling earth atop the wooden casket. When the grave was filled, Zifa sank to his knees, the weight of it all slumping his shoulders. Marshal Kong stepped forward and rested a hand on Zepha's back. "The pirates are no more," Kong announced quietly. "Their crimes avenged. May they find peace beneath the soil." Behind Zepha, Sora offered a gentle pat on the shoulder. He'd watched Zifa brace himself all morning, and though his friend stood firm now, Sora knew how deeply the loss had cut. He let Zephyr linger at the graveside, hoping a few moments of stillness might ease the blow. The next morning, Marshal Kong called a full council in his office. Every senior general was in attendance, every one but Zephyr. Sora shifted in his seat, glancing at the empty chair. The room fell silent, waiting for the meeting to begin. At that moment the door opened. Zephyr entered, expression unreadable, donned in the crisp uniform of an admiral. He took his place at the head of the table. Relief flickered across Kong's face. "Very good," the marshal said, inclining his head. "Now that we're all here, let's get started." Lights dimmed as a projector sprang to life. On the big screen appeared a newly issued reward proclamation. The bounty for Rockefeller Charles, celebrated across 3 oceans as the world's foremost swordsman. Silence filled the room as every officer leaned forward. A hush passed around the table. They all knew this name. Now, they would discuss how to deal with a man whose blade was said to be unbeaten. The purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the notorious pirate of the New World, Charles Rockefeller, captain of the Rockefeller Pirates and the world's greatest swordsman, known far and wide as the Bloody Swordsman. Sora cleared his throat and announced the topic. Around the oval table, every Marine general leaned forward, tension etched on their faces, all except one, Admiral Garp, who sat back with his usual easy grin. Across from him, Admiral Kong folded his massive arms, his expression somber. Sora unfolded a set of dispatches and continued. "Here's the latest intelligence. World destroyer Bundy Wald has been slain by Charles Rockefeller, and the entire Wald pirate fleet was wiped out. I now open the floor to suggestions on how we should deal with Rockefeller and his crew." A murmur swept through the room, but it quickly crystallized into a chorus of Ardline voices. "Permission to speak, sir," barked Vice Admiral Adia. "We must deploy a task force into the New World immediately and capture or eliminate Charles Rockefeller." "Agreed," chimed in Rear Admiral Sorensen. "Before he can amass any more power, we strike. Whatever the cost, we cannot afford to let him grow stronger." Their calls echoed approval around the table, but Admiral Kong raised a hand to quiet the uproar. "Hold on," he rumbled. "Have you considered what it means to send a fleet into the New World? The currents, the weather, hell, the pirate strongholds alone would tear us to pieces before we even sight his ship." A hush fell. Even Garp set aside his nonchalance and regarded Kong thoughtfully. The generals exchanged uneasy glances, suddenly aware that uprooting a single formidable pirate might be the least of their challenges once they set foot in that dangerous sea. Kong leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Charles Rockefeller isn't just another pirate. He's proven himself against the world's most notorious crews. If we walk blindly into the New World, we risk far more than a broken pride. We risk losing ships, men, and our hard-earned naval superiority." Silence reigned as the weight of his words settled over the assembly. Strategies would have to be carefully weighed. Charles Rockefeller was rising fast, and the Marines could not simply throw bounties and battleships at him without a clear plan and a measure of caution. "Do you really think those pirate bigwigs will just let us waltz in there unchallenged?" one of the more cautious admirals protested. "That's exactly the point," another elder admiral agreed. "If we rush into the New World recklessly and suffer heavy losses, our navigational charts will be in shambles. The first half of the Grand Line is already unpredictable. Give the pirates an opening, and even more of them will set sail against us. We need a calculated, steady approach." Murmurs of agreement rose around the room, until a faction of hardliners cut in with a counter-argument. "Then let Rockefeller Charles run wild in the New World if he wants. When will the Navy's justice ever reach him if we keep holding back?" A heated debate erupted, splitting the admirals into 2 clear camps. From his place at the head of the table, Fleet Admiral Jean listened in silence, head bowed. To his right, Admiral Crane carefully weighed each point. To his left, Vice Admiral Garp cracked open a pack of senbei crackers from a drawer and offered them to the others. Admiral Sengoku and Admiral Zephyr exchanged glances. Jean shot a sharp look at Garp before accepting a cracker, crunching it as though nothing were amiss. Zephyr accepted one as well, but set it aside uneaten. Garp, undeterred by their stiff courtesy, munched away contentedly. With each faction growing more entrenched, the arguments rumbled on, and the fate of Charles, alias Rockefeller Charles, hung in the balance as the Navy's senior officers wrestled over the best way forward. Admiral Sora Kong had about reached his limit. The endless bickering of his fellow admirals was driving him mad, and when yet another heated exchange broke out, he could hold back no longer. "Garp, you blasted sea dog," he thundered, hauling back his armored fist. "Steel bone, steel fist!" His punch connected with a deafening clang against Admiral Garp's helmet. In an instant, a deep dent appeared where Sora's knuckles struck, and a stunned hush fell over the entire council chamber. Every admiral froze, their arguments dying on their lips as dozens of eyes swung to fix on him. Sora inhaled slowly, deliberately, and met their stares. "Gentlemen," he said, voice low but cutting through the silence, "this is not the moment for a full-scale push into the new world." That single declaration set the tone for the rest of the meeting. The more seasoned, cautious officers exchanged quiet nods of agreement. The hardliners, silenced by Sora's outburst, bowed their heads. But Sora knew he couldn't let their spirits falter. He straightened, planted both hands on the Vasat, polished oak table, and raised his voice until it filled every corner of the chamber. "Do not be discouraged. Today's setbacks are the seeds of tomorrow's victories. The world government has just approved a massive increase in our naval budget. With these new resources, we will forge a fleet powerful enough to crush the great pirate crews of the New World. The hour is coming when the Navy's justice will sweep across those seas. Will you stand with me? Do you have the confidence to see this through?" He let his words hang in the air, the table rattling beneath his forceful grip, waiting for the answer that would decide the course of the Navy's future. With a thunderous slap on the polished desk, Fleet Admiral Kong Jian ignited the spark of defiance in his officers. "Justice will prevail," he bellowed. In an instant, every admiral sprang to his feet, boots thundering so loudly that the entire corridors of Marineford seemed to tremble, save for two. Vice Admiral Monkey D. Garp remained slouched in his chair, letting out a leisurely yawn, and Admiral Zephyr sat with an unreadable expression, eyes cold and still. Kong allowed himself a satisfied nod, but as he studied the faces before him, his gaze sharpened on those two holdouts. Garp looked every bit the old warhorse, awake, if barely, and Zephyr's silence sent a faint chill through the room. "All right, that's enough for today," Kong Jian commanded. "You are dismissed. From now on, maintain strict patrols at the New World's entrances. Guard East Blue and the first half of the Grand Line, and eradicate any pirates you encounter." "Sir." "Yes, sir." The assembled admirals saluted in unison and filed out, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. When the heavy doors swung shut, only Sengoku and Admiral Zephyr remained. Zephyr shifted uneasily, mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Kong Jian's brow furrowed. "Admiral Zephyr," he prompted, voice low and wary. "It looks like I only have the 2 lines below. Could you please provide the rest of the chapter text you'd like me to rewrite? That way, I can ensure the entire scene reads smoothly, with Charlotte renamed to Charles and all plot points preserved. "1. If you have anything to say, you can say it bluntly. Everyone here is your own." Looking at Zephyr's struggling face, Sora said softly. Chapter 205, Resignation. "Marshal, I hereby tender my resignation as general." Zephyr's voice cut through the War Council chamber like a blade. He stood rigid, jaw clenched, meeting the marshal's gaze with unflinching determination. At once, the room fell deathly silent, so silent that Garp actually stopped mid-chew, the half-eaten donut hanging forgotten at his lips. Marshal Steelbone Kong's face went ashen. He pounded his fist on the polished table. "What? No, I refuse to accept this." Warring States slammed his palm down, rattling the maps spread before them. "Zephyr, you know full well our navy's stretched to the breaking point. You understand what it would mean, losing one of our few seasoned generals?" Crane leaned forward, voice urgent. "And don't forget, Karp is still stonewalling that promotion to admiral. We're already critically undermanned at the upper ranks. If you walk out now, I'll be the only one left to secure these waters." All around, officers murmured their agreement. Zephyr felt their eyes, pleading, disappointed, shocked, and a hollow ache settled in his chest. Ever since he was a boy, he dreamed of rising through the ranks, commanding fleets in the name of honor. But recent events, Political backstabbing, endless countermanded orders, the constant grind of intrigue had drained every ounce of passion he once had. He exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the Marshal. "Please, Marshal, don't argue further. My mind is made up. I'm tired of all this. I'm done." The deaths of his wife and children had shattered Zephyr. He sat at the far end of the Marshal's office, shoulders slumped, purple hair streaked with gray at the temples. At 40, he'd fought countless battles, but none as brutal as the one that cost him everything. "I can't," Zephyr said at last, voice low. He ran a hand through his hair. "I have no heart left for maintaining the sea's so-called peace." Across the room, Kong slammed his fist on the table. "Zephyr, you coward. You wanted justice for your family. Do you really expect us to believe you're done? The pirate who killed them is dead, yes, but there are thousands more out there. Do you tell me you're too tired to chase them down? Have you lost your mind?" Kong's eyes burned with anger and frustration. He despised Zephyr's hesitation, though he knew better than to push too hard. Zephyr didn't answer. He simply stared at the worn wooden floor, as if searching for the will to stand again. Sora, pacing beside the map-strewn desk, let out a frustrated sigh. His chestnut hair caught the lamplight as he whirled to face Zephyr. "That's enough. Go home. Think it over. We'll need your answer by dawn." He waved a hand dismissively. Zephyr rose without a word, slid past the others, and stepped out into the corridor. Only 3 remained in the Marshal's office: Kong, Sora, and Charles. Charles, the young lieutenant newly assigned to this squadron, watched them in silence. He'd heard every word, knew now the depth of Zephyr's grief, and wondered how they could ever bring order to these waters if their greatest captain had lost his purpose. The lamp's glow trembled against the walls as the room fell quiet, and Charles felt the weight of what lay ahead. "What do you think of Admiral Zephyr's proposal to resign?" Sora asked, rubbing his temples as he faced the 3 officers. This wasn't one of his light-hearted speeches. He meant business. Karp spoke first, his voice firm. "No, sir. I'm strongly opposed. If Zephyr steps down, my own duties will skyrocket. I can't allow that." His blunt refusal left the others momentarily speechless. Garp cleared his throat and added his weight to the argument. "Karp is right. We can't lose Zephyr. The seas are already in turmoil. Our current balance of power is precarious. Remove Zephyr, and the pirates will pounce on us without hesitation." The strategist known as Warring States leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Zephyr must stay. 3 pirate crews in the New World are growing bolder by the day, and Whitebeard's son is rapidly rebuilding his fleet. We're under pressure on all fronts." Crane, the chief of naval intelligence, nodded. "Exactly. And let's not forget Charles's recent feat. He single-handedly defeated Bundy Wald, who tried to break into the New World from the North Sea. That victory has made Charles's name legendary, and swordsmen from every shore are now signing up with the Rockefeller pirates." Sora exhaled, tension etched on his face. The room bristled with agreement. Admiral Zephyr was not going anywhere. Although Golden Lion Shiji has kept a quieter profile this year, his forces remain the strongest of the 3 great powers. He controls entire kingdoms, and those kingdoms must pay tribute each year simply to buy peace. As a result, Shiji's army only grows in strength, making now the worst possible moment for General Zephyr to contemplate resignation. Seated at the head of the strategy table, Crane studied the maps of the New World with furrowed brow. Suddenly, he slammed his fist down. "Damn it! What's Shiji plotting now? Another world government?" Whitebeard and Charles exchanged uneasy glances, but it was Admiral Kong who broke the silence. His normally impassive face flared with anger. "He's trying to become the divine golden emperor in the sky." His words echoed through the chamber, and every officer fell silent. Kong rose to his full height. "We need emissaries to persuade Zephyr to stay. The Navy cannot afford to lose a general at a time like this." He let out a long, weary sigh, one of many he had breathed that day under the weight of command. "Understood," Crane said. Warring States, Karp was the first to stand. "I'll go." Whitebeard rose next, followed by Charles. One by one, they filed from the room, leaving Kong alone with his thoughts. Alone in the office, the Admiral stared at the shut door. A profound loneliness settled in his chest, leaving him more burdened and weary than he had ever felt in his career. Garp, Sengoku, and Suru strode down the broad hallway of Marine headquarters. Click, click, Suru's heels rang out on the polished deck as she led the way, while Garp shuffled behind them, a half-eaten donut in hand. "Let's go see Zephyr and talk some sense into him," Sengoku said, determination etched on his face. Suru offered a crisply nod. Garp, crumbs cascading from his mouth, gave a muffled thumbs up. "I'm right behind you." They stopped before a heavy, carved door. Sengoku rapped twice and called, "Zephyr, it's Sengoku. May we come in?" "Enter," came a gruff voice from within. Sengoku pushed the door open and slipped inside. Garp and Suru paused in the corridor, exchanging a wary glance. Seconds ticked by. Finally, Sengoku reemerged, shaking his head in resignation. No words were needed. His expression said it all. Without waiting for Tsuru to ask, he stepped back into Zepha's office. Tsuru's brow furrowed. She followed him in. Now only Garp remained outside. He sighed, finished off his donut with exaggerated solemnity, then rapped gently on the doorframe. "Mind if I drop by?" Silence. Garp huffed, stabbed at his remaining senbei with a crumb-coated finger, and pushed the door open. With senbei in one hand and donut in the other, he slipped back into Zepha's office, and the door stayed firmly shut long after anyone expected. Charles and Fleet Admiral Sengoku exchanged hopeful glances. Minutes felt like hours, until Vice Admiral Garp finally emerged from the ornate chamber, a broad grin on his face, and the last crumbs of a senbei rice cracker clinging to his hand. "Well?" Sengoku pressed as he strode forward. Charles's heart pounded. "Did Zephyr change his mind?" Garp shook his head, still smiling. Sengoku arched an eyebrow. "Then why did it take so long? Don't tell me you were in there just munching senbei the whole time." Garp's grin wavered. "Sengoku, how dare you accuse me of eavesdropping and of snacking on the Admiral's dime? I wouldn't waste Hina's time on rice crackers." Before Sengoku could reply, the air crackled. Garp blinked in surprise. "Buddha palm impact," he exclaimed, and a blinding golden shockwave roared from the chamber's entrance. Charles dove a sea, as the marble walls cracked and dust billowed. When he dared to look again, Garp lay against the rubble, one leg twisted unnaturally, his chest heaving. Around them, Marines hurried forward, jaws slack at the sight of their revered hero felled in an instant. Garp coughed, clutching his ribs. "You son of a," he rasped, but the words died in the ringing silence. Sengoku stood opposite him, arms folded, face unreadable. Charles's breath caught in his chest. Whatever was coming next, it was clear that neither ally nor enemy would take a single step back. Chapter 206, Chief Instructor. Zephyr Crane shook her head in frustration. There was no point in pinning her hopes on Garp. She knew it, and yet she couldn't help it. With a last sigh, she turned and left the room, leaving Sengoku pacing anxiously outside, his eyes fixed on the closed door as he waited for any word from the legendary Vice Admiral. Inside the captain's quarters, Zephyr sat on the edge of his bunk, memories of his wife and children pressing in on him from every side. Garp's words from earlier still rang in his ears, each phrase a fresh stab to his heart. He sank back until he lay flat on the mattress, gripping the sheets so tightly his knuckles went white. "Why are you doing this to me?" he groaned, tears welling and then spilling down his cheeks. The night grew heavy around him as he gave himself over to grief. Dawn found him standing before Admiral Sora's desk in the marshal's office, shoulders squared and expression calm. Sora regarded him silently, his unblinking gaze like steel. "Marshal," Zephyr began, voice steady, "I've made my decision. I'll keep my rank as Rear Admiral, but I won't return to sea. From now on, I want to train our newest recruits." Sora's eyes narrowed. "Is this truly what you want?" he asked. Zephyr met that gaze head-on. "Yes, sir. I've thought it through." After a long moment, Sora leaned forward and brought his stamp down with a firm thud. "Very well. You are hereby appointed Chief Instructor of Recruits at Naval Headquarters. You will oversee basic training and ensure the finest young sailors rise through the ranks." He slid the sealed commission across the desk. Zephyr picked it up with a nod of thanks, feeling the weight of responsibility settle comfortably on his shoulders. News of Zephyr's new post spread swiftly through the Navy. The official bulletin told a polished version of events, omitting the personal anguish and the private bargains made behind closed doors, but everyone who knew Zephyr could read between the lines. He had chosen to stay ashore, to guide the next generation rather than chase the glory of the open sea. At the training grounds that morning, Zephyr adjusted his new chevrons in the bright sunlight. Around him, Fresh-faced recruits stood at attention, their eyes filled with awe and anticipation. He drew a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to forge them into the Navy's future heroes. Chapter 12. Admiral's New Assignment. A thunderous bulletin echoed across every fleet channel. Admiral Ziffa, known throughout the Armada for his legendary black arm technique, had volunteered to become the chief instructor for Navy headquarters' new recruits. He would retain his rank as a full general, even as he traded fleet command for the training grounds. The announcement sent ripples of excitement through every corner of the globe. Within hours, Navy headquarters issued the largest recruitment drive in decades. Idealists and adventurers, patriots and thrill-seekers alike thronged the recruiting stations, each eager for a chance to serve under the storied admiral. North Sea Recruitment Center. Barracks, a Lieutenant Commander Hayes peered over his clipboard at the next applicant, a tall, unflinching man in his mid-30s. His features were set, his posture straight as a plumb line. Hayes tapped his pen against his desk. "Why do you want to join the Navy?" he asked. "To destroy all evil," the applicant replied, his voice as unshakable as granite. In that instant, fiery embers seemed to swirl around him, whether from raw willpower or some hidden gift, no one could tell. The other recruits in the waiting area gawked in stunned silence. Hayes merely nodded, stamping his approved seal without another word. Eastern Coastal Station, Interview Room B. Here, the atmosphere was altogether different. Hayes's counterpart, Ensign Clark, glanced warily at his clipboard. The next candidate chewed her thumbnail, glancing around nervously. "Why the Navy?" Clark prompted. "Well," she began, offering a sheepish smile, "I heard the pay is good. I could really see the benefits." Clark's eyes flicked to the ceiling. He drew a long breath, then, with a resigned shrug, tapped his stamp onto her paperwork. "All right, you're in. Welcome aboard." And so the tide of new recruits poured in, each with motives as diverse as the oceans they'd one day sail. Little did they know, Admiral Zepha's training program would test not only their strength and skills, but also the very reasons that had led them here in the first place. Marine headquarters buzzed with activity as salted air drifted through the corridors. Even amidst the daily bustle, one name stirred particular interest. Charles, Captain Garp's son, and one of the few known wielders of a natural-type devil fruit. The heavy doors to Admiral Zepha's office slammed open, and boisterous laughter filled the room. Captain Garp strode in, hauling Charles onto his hip. "Admiral Zepha," Garp bellowed, "I'm leaving my son in your hands. Treat him as if he were your own. If he steps out of line, don't hesitate to discipline him. Spare no mercy." Garp delivered a series of enthusiastic pats, more like playful slaps, to Charles's shoulder. The boy's cheeks turned bright red. "Yes, sir," Charles managed, trying to straighten. Admiral Zepha watched him with mild amusement. He'd known Charles for 2 years, ever since Garp first brought him to headquarters. Though Charles was famous for being the hero's son, it was his gentle kindness, far more than his pedigree, that earned him friends among the Marines. Before Zepha could answer, Garp barked, "And no calling him uncle, got it?" He rapped Charles sharply on the back of the head again. Charles staggered, hand to his skull, and inadvertently muttered, "Uncle." At last, a genuine smile broke across Zepha's face, his first in months. Charles bowed respectfully. "Thank you, Admiral Zepha." Zepha nodded. "Very well, Captain Garp. He'll be safe under my watch." Garp pumped his fist. "Excellent." He turned and thundered out of the office, his laughter trailing behind him. As soon as the doors closed, Zepha stood and offered Charles a kinder pat on the shoulder. "All right, Charles. Ready to get started?" Charles returned the smile, embarrassment fading. "Absolutely, Admiral." Together, they left the office and stepped into the heart of Marine headquarters, ready for whatever came next. Over the past 2 years at Naval headquarters, Vice Admiral Zepha has watched Charles closely and been impressed every step of the way. Far from adopting the entitled airs so common among the children of high-ranking officers, Charles treats his fellow sailors with genuine warmth and respect. In battle, he fights with fearless resolve, never flinching at the prospect of danger. To Zepha, it's as though he's looking at a younger version of Charles's own renowned father, and word of his performance has spread quickly through the Navy's upper echelons. Senior officers are unanimous. Charles is the perfect heir to his father's legacy. He possesses not only exceptional combat instincts, but also the people skills and composure of a born leader. Admiral Kong has even proposed fast-tracking him toward admiralty, declaring Charles the top candidate for fleet admiral when the time inevitably comes. With Garp's reputation as a naval hero backing him, Charles already enjoys a level of influence few newcomers ever attain. That said, his mentors have been careful not to throw him into harm's way prematurely. Instead, Charles spends his days shadowing veteran officers, processing dispatches, studying operational doctrine, and mastering the countless details of naval command. Privately, Admiral Kong has teased Garp for not sending Charles to headquarters sooner. Garp only laughs it off, confident that when his son finally steps into the spotlight, he'll be more than ready. Everyone agreed that Charles was destined to become the Navy's greatest seaman. No one dared object. This time, Fleet Admiral Zephyr had been appointed chief instructor for the new recruits, and Vice Admiral Garp personally took Charles aside for rigorous one-on-one training, making sure he wouldn't be distracted by the other officers. 4 seas united under one flag, Zephyr proclaimed as naval bases from every corner of the world funneled their most promising youngsters into headquarters. The moment the Navy dropped its pretense and revealed its full roster, an endless stream of geniuses paraded before the admirals. Natural-type magma fruit, natural-type light fruit, outstanding. These are exceptionally rare powers, true treasures to be cultivated. Admiral Congo read aloud from the dispatch he'd just received from North Blue, a broad grin splitting his face. Top-tier devil fruit users of this caliber would skyrocket headquarters combat strength and form its future spearhead. Zephyr studied his own report and returned the smile. They're in capable hands now. I'll see their progress in 1 year. 1 year later, I look forward to seeing the results. Sora handed the dossier to Zephyr with a determined nod. Don't worry, Marshal. I'll dedicate myself entirely to training them. I'm confident we'll produce a few future generals. Zephyr returned the salute and stepped forward to address the recruits gathered before him. Time seemed to slow as he surveyed the room in his deep purple naval general's uniform. Adjusting his glasses, he cleared his throat and spoke with authority. Welcome, everyone. I'll be your instructor for the next year. My name is Zephyr, but you may simply call me Instructor. I will teach you combat techniques and how to handle pirates. If any of you feel you cannot meet my standards, you may withdraw now. I have no room for wasted effort. A hush fell over the assembly as Zephyr's commanding presence pressed in on the young sailors. Then, in unison, they cried out, "Yes, Instructor." Zephyr offered a curt nod. Good. Let's begin with a readiness drill. Those of you who can withstand my next assault will earn top marks for this month's evaluation. Form up and prepare yourselves. Are you all ready? Zephyr clenched his fists, flashed a wide grin at the hundreds of students before him, and waited. His question hung in the air, prompting nervous glances around the crowd. But before anyone could answer, Zephyr pressed on. Chapter 207, An Unconventional Opening. After the special assembly, not a single sailor in the boot camp could stand. Zephyr simply exhaled, not even breaking a sweat. Heh, rookies, he said, surveying the knocked-out recruits with a relaxed smile. You've still got a long way to go. No sooner had he spoken than an insolent voice rang out. Instructor Zephyr, haven't you felt a real kick before? A blur of yellow cut through the air. Behind Zephyr, a young cadet with a bruised nose and a swollen cheek lifted his leg in a swift arc aimed at Zephyr's head. Humph, you're still wet behind the ears, teacher. Zephyr barely flinched. With a calm tilt of his head, he sidestepped the kick by inches. In one fluid motion, he backhanded the attacker's foot, then slammed it into the gravel with bone-shaking force. Bang! The yellow-clad cadet flew forward, skidding to a halt in a cloud of dust and pebbles. He coughed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Cough! Zephyr casually extended a hand to help him up. Young and cocky, he remarked with a faint chuckle. Now, who's next? Today's first lesson is to help you discover your own strength. Charles tossed back his coat of justice, revealing bronze-toned skin that glinted in the sunlight. Big fire! A deep voice called from behind him, and the air instantly heated to a furnace's blast. Yet Charles didn't even flinch. A red-clad figure lunged in with a magma-forged fist, smashing into his back. In an instant, Charles's body darkened to a steel-like black. clang, and he stood unmoved as if rooted to the spot. The attacker staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. Sweat beaded on his forehead. "Kid, you really enjoy ambushing an old hand, don't you?" Charles pivoted just enough to seize the yellow-clad assailant who tried to flank him. With a single heave, he sent the yellow goon crashing into the stunned red fighter. They collided with a thunderous bang and collapsed in a heap, completely out of action. Charles folded his arms over his chest and surveyed the deck. Sailor after sailor lay unconscious. Only one opponent remained standing, silently watching. "Dorag," he called calmly, as if inviting the last man to step forward. "What are you waiting for?" Zifa called out from the crowd, a sharp edge in his voice. "Take care, teacher!" Drago's eyes narrowed, and in the next heartbeat, he was gone. A bystander whistled. "Nice move, 6th Naval style." Everyone recognized that technique on sight. As the son of Admiral Karp and hailed as the rising star of the Navy's younger generation, Drago's talent was no secret. Zephyr himself muttered under his breath, "Dragon Claw!" With that, Drago snapped his fingers together and lunged. Zephyr didn't meet the attack head-on. He folded himself like a paper marionette, activating the Navy's paper form. By dispersing his strength and manipulating the airflow around him, he turned his body as thin and flexible as parchment, slipping away in a single heartbeat. Bang! Drago's claws sliced through empty air with a crackling roar. The gathered sailors recoiled, eyes wide. "Unbelievable," one of them breathed. A female naval officer, still catching her breath, shook her head in disbelief. He was right there, and yet Zephyr just vanished. Charles adjusted his glasses, his gaze sharpening the moment he recognized Zephyr's stance. He'd seen that posture before, one of the 6th Naval Arts, the Lotus Sweep. Without hesitation, he shifted his weight and launched his leg in a whipping arc. "Blue Lotus Kick," he called. An ethereal slash of energy cut through the air from Charles's foot. Zifa's eyes lit up in delight. So young, and already wielding the Lotus Sweep. A true prodigy of the physical arts. Clang! Steel rang against steel as Zifa raised his iron-reinforced guard. He'd parried Charles's kick with the iron block technique, but the force of the blow still rent a tear across his expensive coat. "Hey!" Zephyr snarled, glancing down at the ragged fabric. "Do you have any idea how much this coat cost? It's almost equal to my monthly pay." Charles offered a faint, apologetic smile. Zifa shook himself free of the distraction and lunged forward, muscles coiling like springs. He closed the gap in a flash, his fingers splaying wide. "Finger gun," he hollered. A torrent of blows followed. Each fingertip struck Charles's torso with thunderous jabs. The rapid assault blurred into a steady barrage, forcing Charles to weave and dodge. His breathing grew rapid, his cheeks flushing under the relentless pressure. "Down!" Zephyr barked as he rained the final strikes down on Charles's shoulders and chest. But at that moment, a vivid image flashed through Charles's mind, the precise pattern of Zifa's finger strikes. Before the final blow landed, Charles pivoted on his heel and slipped aside, letting Zifa's fist cut through empty air. Landing lightly on his feet, Charles steadied himself. He could see Zifa's half-surprised, half-angry expression. The battle was just beginning, but Charles was more determined than ever. "Wait, what?" Zephyr snorted in surprise. So the boy really had understood? At his age, too. Dorag twisted to dodge, and for a fleeting moment, relief flickered across Zephyr's face as he wiped cold sweat from his brow. "Clever all you like," Zephyr said, voice smooth and dangerous, "but you're not walking away from this." Before Dorag could react, Zephyr's fist rocketed into the side of his face. A fiery imprint bloomed on Dorag's cheek, and he hit the ground with a dull thud. Drago, standing too close, took the next punch and crumpled beside him. Both boys lay still, the blow forcing them into unconsciousness almost instantly. Only 3 recruits managed to stay on their wobbly feet. The rest were scattered across the field, out cold. Zephyr surveyed the survivors with cold blue eyes. "Up," he barked. "Run around the training grounds, and don't stop until I say so. If any of you dares to quit, you'll lose your dinner tonight." A chorus of groans and curses rose, but the recruits dared not disobey. Teeth gritted, they forced aching legs into motion and began circling the field in ragged laps. Night fell, and at last a heavy silence settled over the camp, broken only by the labored breathing and pounding footsteps of those still running. No one remained on the field except the patrolling Navy. In the center of the clearing lay three figures, motionless, the very dragoons Charles and Zephyr had felled during yesterday's spar. "Ow!" one of them groaned. Drago stirred, pressing a hand to his cheek where a fresh bruise throbbed. "Ugh, where am I? Did I really sleep through an entire day?" He blinked at the bright sky overhead, muttered something incoherent, and then his knees buckled as the world spun. He collapsed face first into the dirt. "Whoa!" Two more voices went up in alarm. The other dragoons stirred alongside Drago, pushing to one knee, then gingerly standing as they took in the empty training ground. A wiry soldier with trembling legs was first on his feet. He lunged forward and caught Drago under the arm, keeping him from toppling over. "Man, you've got guts," he said with a wry grin. "Not many people go at it like you do." Drago managed a weak smile at the jab, but the third man, broad-shouldered and stone-faced, stood off to the side, arms crossed, his frown deepening at the light-hearted teasing. Chapter 208, New Friends. Charles felt a prick of suspicion. He was certain the man beside him was silently blaming him, yet he couldn't prove it. Before he could protest, a strong arm steadied him. "Are you all right? Is your leg okay? Want me to take you to the infirmary?" Dorag asked, concern in his voice. Charles managed a grateful nod. Then another voice spoke up. "Need a hand? Hey, I'm Polusalino, from Beihai in the North Sea." Dorag offered a friendly smile. "I'm Dorag, from Donghai in the East Sea." The two turned to the third man, whose expression remained unreadable. He stepped forward and introduced himself crisply. "I'm Sakaski, from the North Sea." Polusalino's face brightened. "North Sea too? That makes us countrymen." Sakaski simply gave Polusalino a sidelong glance and said nothing. Polusalino shrugged and laughed it off. "He's just a little shy, that's all." A rumble in Polusalino's stomach cut through the moment. "Too bad the cafeteria's closed by now. I'm starved." Dorag watched him rub his belly and shook his head. "No way you're going hungry on my watch. Come by my place. I've got a fully stocked kitchen." Grateful for their company and offers of help, Charles let the three guide him away into the night, the first strands of new friendship weaving between them. Drago grinned at them. "All right, feel free to cook. Just don't be too hard on my handiwork." "Excellent. Excellent." Polusalino clapped his hands and beamed. "You're a real friend." Drago's cheeks heated at the praise, but he quickly turned to Sakaski, who was starting to stammer out a refusal. Right on cue, Sakaski's stomach rumbled so loudly that he flushed scarlet. "Ahem? Okay, fine, I'll help." "Perfect," Drago said, looping an arm through Sakaski's. Together, the three of them set off down the street. A few minutes later, Drago swung open a heavy wooden door. "Welcome to my place." Polusalino stepped inside and froze. The room was cavernous, a lofty space furnished with a long dining table, polished cabinets, and a row of gleaming cookware. "This is incredible. Why aren't you in the dorms with the rest of us? You've got your own suite." Sakaski and Drago exchanged amused looks. Polusalino's eyes darted around, lingering on every detail. His breath caught. This is exactly what I saw in my dream." Drago shrugged with a modest smile. "I arrived early at Navy headquarters. They gave me this room as my quarters." Drago leaned back in his chair, a wry smile on his face. "I was serving as deputy on the crane staff," he began, "when I heard Uncle Zephyr was about to take up an instructor's post. Next thing I knew, my father had me transferred to the naval training camp." Polusalino's fork clattered onto his plate. "Wait, your father must be some high-ranking official, right?" Even Sokolsky, who'd been quietly observing, perked up at the suggestion. Drago shrugged modestly. "Nothing that grand, though you've probably heard of him. To the Navy, he's Marine Hero Garp. To the pirates, he's the Mad Dog." "Garp?" Polusalino practically leaped from his seat. "No way, brother, that's—" He stopped himself, eyes wide. Sokolsky leaned forward, astonished. "Come on," Drago chuckled, setting 2 steaming cups of tea on the table. "My father's achievements are his own. I'm just Drago, no laurels borrowed, no favors expected." He offered the cups with a grin. "Now, shall we?" Charles watched Polusalino's eyes light up and with a quick but careful motion handed over the dish. Sakaski offered a soft thank you, and Dorag smiled in response. Before long, the three of them were seated around Dorag's low wooden table, tucking into a sumptuous meal. Conversation flowed easily. Polusalino peppered Dorag with question after question. Dorag replied with good-humored patience, and Sakaski listened in quiet attention. They lingered over the last of the food and drank sweet herbal tea long after night had fallen. Finally, Sakaski and Policelino rose to go, bidding Dorag good night as they slipped into the moonlit street. Dorag lingered by the pack window for a moment, inhaling the crisp night air. Then he moved to his desk, lit the lamp, and picked up his pen. Placing the nib on the paper, he began to write. Today I made 2 new friends, Policelino and Sakaski. Outside, the moon rode high in the sky, its pale light filtering through the curtains and casting Dorag's solitary figure in gentle silver. 1 month has passed in the New World since Charles defeated the pirate lord Bundy Wald. His single greatest prize? Without question, it was Bundy's devil fruits, the Momo fruit and the cube fruit. As Charles sailed homeward, Barrett approached him with an eager grin. Before Charles could speak, Barrett produced 2 neatly wrapped bundles. At first, Charles could scarcely believe his eyes. "Where did you find these?" he asked, voice tight with anticipation. "In the kitchen," Barrett replied simply. Charles's heart leapt. He had long suspected these were the very fruits he'd coveted, the mysterious Momo fruit and the coveted cube fruit. Carefully unwrapping the paper, he prepared to confirm his hunch and to claim the powers that would chart the course of his future adventures. Charles hadn't even made it to the celebratory banquet on Kame Island. He raced straight home, eager to confirm his suspicions. As soon as he closed the door, he pulled out his devil fruit illustrated compendium and flipped through the pages. His heart pounded as he matched the strange, cube-shaped fruit and the puffy, peach-like one with the entries in the book. They were, without a doubt, the cube fruit and the Momo fruit, both classified as top-tier devil fruits. The realization hit him like a freight train. After his skirmish with the Walled pirates, not 1 but 2 devil fruits had literally exploded into existence before him. Now that he understood what he'd found, Charles felt his legs give way. He collapsed onto his tatami mat, his mind racing with the possibilities these powers might unlock. For a long minute he lay there in stunned silence. Then laughter bubbled up uncontrollably. 2 top-level devil fruits, both within his reach. The sheer potential was almost overwhelming. Charles was still catching his breath when another wave of news crackled over the small radio he'd set on the low shelf. Admiral Zifa, they announced, had been reassigned as chief instructor of the Navy's new recruit training camp, while retaining his rank of admiral. Under Zifa's command, the Navy would launch a global talent search, drawing recruits from every corner of the seas to be forged into the next generation of naval power. Charles sat up, his mind already racing with new ambitions. The sea was calling him in more ways than one, and with 2 devil fruits at his disposal, he'd be ready for anything. Chapter 1. Farewell to the South China Sea. Before long, a new generation of shining stars will emerge. Among them will be 2 future admirals, Policelino the Kazopa and Sakaski the Red Dog, as well as Monkey D. Drago, destined to lead the Revolutionary Army. But for now, they are only names on the horizon. South China Sea, 2.5 years later. The Roger pirates, after lingering in these warm waters for what felt like an eternity, were finally weighing anchor. At the bow of the Oro Jackson, Captain Roger D. Charles gripped the rail and called back to the shore. "Goodbye, Luju. Thank you for your hospitality all these years." On the beach below, Luju waved furiously. Just behind him, reconnaissance scouts and local merchants cheered their favorite pirate crew one last time. A worried voice rang out across the water. "Roger-san, watch yourselves. Don't let the Navy catch you." Roger let out a booming laugh and stroked his luxuriant beard as he looked back at Luju. He'd never seemed happier. Behind him, First Mate Silvers Rayleigh shook his head with an exasperated sigh. "I don't know why you always drag us back here," Rayleigh muttered under his breath. 3 or 4 days of sailing, then 2 weeks on that island. Self-cultivation, you call it, when everyone knows you've been smitten the Luju the whole time. Roger just winked and turned away, already barking orders down the deck. The crew scampered to their stations, hoisting sails and manning the ropes. Below deck, the last barrels of supplies were lashed down, and the charts were stowed away. The sun slipped lower on the horizon. Soon, the Oro Jackson would be cutting through open sea again, chasing the wild freedom of the Grand Line. Roger may have lingered for love, but now his heart beat for one thing only: adventure. and as the Roger pirates finally set sail, a new era, where legends rise and empires tremble, was about to begin. Had it not been for the orders from Navy headquarters, Roger probably would still be here, refusing to budge. Chapter 209. The Roger Pirates Go to Sea. A brisk sea breeze carried salty spray across the deck of the Oro Jackson as dawn broke over the New World. At the prow, Pirate King Gol D Roger held a freshly printed broadsheet, his gray hair and beard whipping in the wind. Beside him, First Mate Sylvester Raleigh took a long draw from his hip flask, the fire of the wine warming him against the morning chill. Roger tapped the page with a glint in his eye. "The New World's about to get turbulent again," he said. "By the looks of this report, Golden Lion Shiki is going to be the first to stir up trouble. That man's appetite for power is legendary." Raleigh glanced at the headline, folded the paper, and offered it back. "Shiki's no ordinary rival," he replied. "He isn't like Whitebeard or Charles, who each follow their own code. Shiki craves influence for its own sake, and he's ruthless. In recent years, he's carved out a kingdom that rivals the world government, yet rules with far less mercy. He forces islanders to pay sky-high protection fees, and any resistance is crushed without pity." Roger unfolded the paper again, reading the bold banner headline aloud. "Pirate Admiral Golden Lion Shiki attacks World Government Alliance nations." Roger's eyes narrowed. He's actually striking at territories allied with the world government? Even Calico Locke held back from something this brazen. Locke and the Marines must be on full alert. Raleigh cracked a grin. "The government's fleets are already stretched thin. If Shiki pushes too hard, they might not have the ships to stop him." Roger folded the paper decisively and snapped it shut. He turned his gaze to the open sea, where distant waves glittered like scattered jewels. "Then we can't stand by and watch," he said, voice calm but firm. "Prepare to set a course north. It's time the Roger pirates reminded the world why the Pirate King still rules these waters." Below deck, the crew sprang into action, securing lines, readying the cannons, and spreading the word that the Oro Jackson was about to sail into the heart of a brewing storm. Above, the sun rose fully, illuminating a vast ocean ripe with danger and ripe for the taking. And so the Roger pirates cast off, heading straight into the fray as the New World once more threatened to break loose. "Kaido, that Golden Lion, is completely out of control." Raleigh slammed the newspaper on the table, his frustration evident. "Everything's different now. The world government's prestige is in freefall, and its member nations keep getting overrun. Remember that kid Kaido? He single-handedly raised an allied country. Zephra caught him, but couldn't finish the job, and Kaido slipped through their fingers." Roger sighed as he flipped through the broadsheet. His brow furrowed with worry. "That's exactly the point. In the New World, the world government's clout has been worthless for years. Mention the New World to anyone these days, and they think pirate paradise, not imperial authority." Riley leaned back, exhaling deeply. "It wasn't always like this," he said, eyes drifting to the sea beyond the window. "When we first set sail, the Navy had Garp on our tail day and night. He chased the Roger pirates for decades, until about 2 years ago. Sure, Roger's kept a low profile since he fell in love. But the truth is, the Navy's too stretched thin to mount a serious pursuit these days. A relentless tide of pirates scours the seas, and the great captains of the New World clash in ceaseless skirmishes. Every ounce of the Navy's strength is stretched to its breaking point. At last, the Admiralty has accepted a hard truth. If they hope to stand against the pirates' unending parade of gifted fighters, they must deliberately cultivate their own elite combatants. Until now, they've depended entirely on the veterans of the warlord era, legends like Garp and his contemporaries, but that era cannot last forever. A fresh generation of champions must be raised. Roger fell silent, staring off into the distance. Sensing his friend's sudden lellness, Silver's Rayleigh turned to him with concern. "Roger, what's on your mind?" Roger blinked and met Rayleigh's gaze, his brow creased in thought. "I can't explain it," he said quietly. "Over the past few years, I felt a voice whispering in my ear, telling me to seek something specific. At first it was faint, almost like a half-remembered dream, but lately it's grown unmistakably clear and urgent." Rayleigh's expression darkened as he frowned. "And what is it telling you to find?" he pressed. Roger shook his head, running a hand through his hair. That's the thing. I don't know yet, but I have to find out. That voice is growing louder. He must be near, Roger muttered, lifting his gaze toward the distant horizon. At the helm, Jabba suddenly shouted, pointing excitedly, "Captain Roger! Land ho! An island ahead!" Roger's eyes widened as he finally spotted the speck of green against the blue sea. Rayleigh, watching Roger's sudden change in demeanor, frowned with concern. "Roger, are you all right?" Roger's grip tightened on Rayleigh's shoulder. "Rayleigh, can't you hear it? The island is calling me. I have to go ashore." Taken aback by his friend's urgency, Rayleigh gently shook him. "Easy, Roger. Jabba, bring us about." Ignoring Rayleigh's calm instructions, Roger turned back to the helm and barked, "Full speed ahead, Captain." With a swift adjustment of the ropes and rudder, Jabba angled the bow toward the small, emerging island. The ship surged forward, cutting through the waves toward whatever mystery lay beyond. "Is there any treasure in the captain's cabin?" A small boy with a freckled red nose came scampering up to Gol D Roger and Silver's Rayleigh. His eyes shone with excitement as he stared up at Roger's broad grin. "Ha! Of course there is," Roger laughed, scooping the boy into his arms. "I can feel it. Whatever's hidden in that cabin is bound to change our lives." "Treasure hunting is my favorite," the boy Charles shouted, wriggling happily. "Captain, please take me with you." Charles was barely 5, but the moment he heard the word treasure, his whole face lit up. He glanced toward the distant islands, as if he could already taste the adventure. "Charles, stop talking nonsense," came a sharp voice. A red-haired boy, almost the same age, stomped forward and planted himself by Roger's wooden leg. A toy dagger hung at his waist, but his disdain was real enough. "This isn't play. We could be after the secret hoard of some legendary pirate. If we find it, we'll be rolling in gold, and I'll finally fill my room with snacks." Charles wriggled free of Roger's embrace and retorted, "No way! I called dibs on that, and my room comes first." Shanks crossed his arms and smirked. The two boys launched into a fresh round of squabbling, voices rising in a chorus of complaints. Roger raised his voice over the din. "All right, that's enough. Quiet down. This isn't the time for a food fight." At once, the two fell silent, glancing guiltily at each other. Charles and Shanks, they'd always bickered like this, but the promise of treasure was too thrilling to ignore. And already, the sea breeze carried the scent of the adventure waiting just beyond the horizon. "Will you two quit bickering for once?" Rayleigh slammed his palm onto both of their heads and frowned. Bucky and Shanks stood there, glaring at each other, neither willing to back down. Every day they squabbled and even came to blows, but somehow they always made up just as quickly. "Quiet," Roger chuckled, leaning against the rail. The ship's prow was already skimming the shoreline. "We're almost at the island. Treasure! Here we come!" Bucky's eyes lit up and then dimmed. He jumped in place. "What if there isn't any treasure?" Shanks scoffed. "Of course there is. It's not treasure," Bucky shot back. "It is treasure." "It's not." Their argument reignited, but Roger and Rayleigh merely exchanged amused glances. Finally, Rayleigh shook his head. "I said enough. Arguing won't find us treasure." Roger tapped his straw hat and called out, "All right, everyone off the ship. Let's go treasure hunting." With that, the crew disembarked onto the sandy beach, leaving Bucky and Shanks to trail behind, still squabbling, but at least heading in the right direction. "I don't even know what's going on over on the island yet, you idiot," Rayleigh shouted as he spotted Roger darting inside. Cursing under his breath at having lost sight of him, he sprinted after Roger. Behind him, the rest of the curious crew hurried to keep up. Chapter 210, Roger's Fate. A handful of men stood at the mouth of the cave, its yawning darkness swallowing the torchlight. Bucky froze in his tracks, his voice barely above a whisper. "There aren't any blind people living down here, right?" He clutched at Rayleigh's leg as if for dear life. Rayleigh rolled his eyes. "Come on, Bucky. Are you actually scared?" From beside him, Shanks let out a mocking laugh. "If you're such a coward, why don't you go in first?" Infuriated, Bucky straightened and shot Shanks a glare. "You think I'm afraid of a blind man? Don't be ridiculous." Shanks smothered his grin behind his hand. "All right, then. After you." "Bastard," Bucky snarled, barreling past them and dashing to the cave entrance. "Just wait until I catch you." Rayleigh shook his head, rubbing his temple. Those two are hopeless. Roger, however, never broke his gaze from the dark tunnel. "Let's have a look," he said calmly, raising his torch. Without hesitation, he stepped inside. One by one, the rest followed, Bucky bringing up the rear with Rayleigh, Shanks shadowing Roger's every move. The cavern was cold and damp. Every drip of water from the ceiling echoed eerily off the rock walls, setting nerves on edge. The faint light from their torches revealed only more shadows ahead, promising that whatever lay deeper in the cave would soon reveal itself. Small hands gripped the hems of their coats as if clinging to safety itself. The two friends walked until they came to a sudden stop. "What is this?" Rayleigh whispered, staring at the enormous gray monolith before them. Strange, indecipherable symbols were carved deep into its surface. The sight set Roger's heart racing. Though he couldn't read the characters, some voice inside him insisted they were of the utmost importance. "Roger, do you know what it says?" Rayleigh asked, turning with hopeful eyes. But Roger remained rooted in place, his gaze fixed on the stone. "Roger!" Rayleigh reached out and gently shook his shoulder. "Ah, Rayleigh, what's the matter?" Roger finally blinked and focused on his friend. Rayleigh exhaled sharply. "I'm asking you, what is this stone? What do those inscriptions mean?" Roger shook his head, regret flickering across his face. "I'm not sure," he admitted, "but I know that this stone matters to me. It's the writing on it that's important." Charles pressed his hand against the ancient stone wall. In that instant, it felt as if he'd been torn through time itself. Countless images flickered through his mind, jumbled and fleeting. He couldn't yet decipher their meaning, but their weight pressed heavily on his thoughts. As his palm made contact, a silent current of inky black energy slithered along his skin and surged into his body, leaving a shock of cold fire in its wake. Meanwhile, in the great palace of Mary Gioia, a figure cloaked in voluminous black robes sat motionless on an ebony throne. The Lord's face was hidden by shadow, making it impossible to tell whether they were man or woman. Across the polished marble wall hung a broad-brimmed straw hat, evidence that their agent had failed. "Brother D. Charles, have you recovered the historical text?" The robed voice drifted through the vaulted hall, calm yet edged with disappointment. After a moment's pause, it hardened into command. "Very well. Issue the order. Summon the 5 old stars and apprehend Brother D. Charles at once." The decree rang throughout the palace corridors. Outside, the guard detail, stern soldiers in polished armor, rushed to carry the message to the 5 old stars, an elite cadre bound by ancient oath. Their leader, the broad-shouldered Wu Laoxing, received the summons with a measured nod. His eyes flicked across the ranks of his comrades, 5 warriors whose names inspired both reverence and dread. "We understand," Wu Laoxing said, turning to his 5 celestial guards. "By our Lord's command, we will capture Brother D. Charles without fail." "We will not fail you," one of the 5 old stars replied, voice steady with resolve. And with that, their silhouette as melted into the shadows, setting out on a mission that would change everything. The God's Guard finally withdrew. In the wake of their retreat, one of the 5 old stars, a bald, stern-faced man, studied the dossier on the Roger pirates and frowned. "The D-Clan?" he murmured. "Why would Lord M take an interest in them now?" Another elder leafed through the files. "I don't know," he admitted, "but Lord M's orders are absolute. We'll hand this matter over to the Navy. They're to throw everything they have at the Roger pirates, and if they need CP0's help, so be it." Satan Shengju tapped his ivory-handled cane against the floor. "Agreed," he said. One by one, the remaining elders nodded their consent. The bald elder picked up his Den Mushi and placed a call to Navy headquarters. "Understood. We'll mobilize immediately." Back at Steelbone Air Station, Admiral Sora listened in disbelief as the message came through. He stared at the speakerphone, baffled. Why are we to capture the Roger pirates at all costs? They've been inactive for 2 years. Despite his misgivings, Sora wasted no time. He summoned his fellow admirals, Sengoku, Capzepha, Crane, and the others, to the briefing room. When Kong arrived, he laid out the elders' directive in full detail. A moment of stunned silence followed. Then Kong broke into a booming laugh. "Wahaha! Finally, we get our shot at the Roger pirates. I've got to capture Roger." The moment Fleet Admiral Shura announced that the Pirate King's whereabouts had been confirmed, Vice Admiral Garp pounded his fist on the war room table. "Enough standing around. Let's move." Shura's face grew stern. This is an order straight from the world government. We cannot afford any mistakes. I want every senior combat unit in the Navy on this mission." He looked around the table. Sengoku, the former fleet admiral known as Buddha, nodded immediately. "Understood." Admiral Crane gave his assent as well, and Garp whooped in approval. All but one. Every head turned to Admiral Zepha. Zepha met Shura's steady gaze. "Marshal, I must respectfully decline," he said. "Since taking command of the new naval training barracks, I've sworn off active battle. My place now is here, preparing our sailors for war, not fighting at the front." Shura sighed. "Very well." Garp shot Zepha a reproachful look but had no retort. "Fine," he grumbled. "Train the Navy. The rest of us will handle this." With the meeting concluded, Garp seized Sengoku's arm. "Time to set sail. Roger won't wait for us." Moments later, their fleet thundered southward across the China Sea, and far away, hidden inside a dim cavern, Roger stood frozen in disbelief. Before him, one surreal image after another flickered in the gloom, as though his life were unfolding on an endless slideshow. "Roger!" Seeing him frozen in place, Rayleigh called out sharply from the side. "What's wrong?" Roger blinked, then murmured in awe. "Rayleigh, this is it! A historical text from 800 years ago, the missing century the world government erased." He yanked on Rayleigh's sleeve, heart-pounding. "Let me go, Rayleigh. This is the proof we need." Rayleigh grinned at Roger's excitement. "A genuine historical manuscript? That's more valuable than any treasure." But Bucky's enthusiasm drained away. "I'm telling you, it's useless right now," he snapped. "It won't help us solve anything." Shanks chuckled at Bucky's disappointment, while Bucky harshly glared at the ancient stone wall before them. "Fine. I'm tearing it down myself. That wall's the only barrier between us and that lost century." Roger drew a crumpled scrap of parchment from his coat and carefully smoothed it out. The faded characters glowed faintly in the dim torchlight, a promise of the secrets they had long sought. Chapter 211, Sea God Poseidon. "Look at this rubbing," Roger thundered, holding the weathered stone carving aloft. "Rayleigh, I've made up my mind. I'm going to uncover the true history of this world." Silently, Rayleigh studied the carving in Roger's hand. Taken aback by his captain's sudden resolve, he hesitated for only a heartbeat before nodding. "Very well, I'll stand by you. The Roger pirates will obey your command." One after another, the rest of the crew leaned forward, voices ringing out. "Aye, Captain. Lead the way and we'll follow." Jabra slammed his fist against the haft of his twin axes, laughter booming off the cave walls. "Ha ha ha, you call us children, Roger? Fine, our goal is clear. We'll learn the world's hidden truths, even if it costs us our very lives." Roger's roaring laughter echoed through the cavern. "Long live the Roger pirates." The men cheered, but a few voices jeered back. "What truth could there possibly be? There's no treasure in ancient riddles." Amid the clamor, Charles, the little red-nosed boy, stood up straight, hand pressed to his chest. He fixed his gaze on his crewmate Bucky and said with a sly grin, "Don't get too cocky, Bucky. The real adventure's just beginning." Shanks leaned over and rested a hand on Charles's shoulder, a mischievous grin lighting up his face. "Treasure, eh? If we uncover anything while we're chasing down the true history, we won't just leave it buried, will we?" At once Charles's eyes brightened. He dashed over to Gol D Roger, his hero, and nearly bounced on the balls of his feet. "Captain Roger, I'm going after treasure." He jabbed a finger in the air, turning to the rest of the crew. "When we find it, that treasure is mine." Roger simply chuckled, clearly amused by the boy's enthusiasm. "Ho ho, I'm not just after any treasure. I want the legendary secret hidden deep in history itself." Charles let out a whoop and jumped in the dim light of the cavern. A few of the pirates laughed and shook their heads. "You greedy little red-nosed brat." "Hey!" Charles shot back, his cheeks flaming. "Who you calling red-nosed?" More laughter rippled around him, warm and easy. Seconds later, the Roger pirates filed out of the cave, excitement humming in the air. Roger strode up to the bow of the ship, raised his voice, and shouted, "All hands, prepare to weigh anchor! We sail for the greatest secret treasure ever buried in history." Charles watched as the vessel slowly slipped away from the island, its wake rippling across the harbor. Before him lay the promise of a new world, an opportunity he had dreamed of since setting sail from home. At the bustling port, a crowd had gathered around the grandest ship he'd ever commissioned. Mr. Charles, called Wensmoke Gage, the master shipwright, stepping forward with quiet pride. He gestured toward the towering hull behind him. Most of the fleet you ordered is finished, but this is the Poseidon. A windless ship, I promise you. The most advanced vessel on the seas today. Charles tilted his head back and stared up at the Poseidon, its steel plating gleaming in the sun. Along both sides were banks of cannons and neatly stowed weapons. At the prow stood a majestic figurehead, Poseidon, god of the sea, trident raised as if commanding the waves themselves. The ship boasted 7 decks, 4 below and 3 above, rising 27 meters high, 26 meters wide, and stretching 170 meters in length. It dwarfed every cargo boat and fishing skiff in the harbor. Come on, Gage urged. Let me show you around. Heart racing, Charles strode forward, his hand brushing the cool metal of the gangplank. The touch sent a thrill up his spine. This was no ordinary ship, but the culmination of his vision, crafted to chart new routes across uncharted oceans. Mr. Charles, over here, Gage called, leading him toward the main deck's entrance. Charles followed, eager to step aboard and see his dreams take shape beneath his feet. Gage swept his arm over the open deck with unmistakable pride. These panels are all solar-powered, he explained. They absorb RB sunlight, convert it into electricity to drive the ship, and store enough energy to keep us running for 7 days without a single ray of sun. He grinned, clearly delighted by his own invention, though he might not have minded admitting how many late nights and lost brain cells went into perfecting the storage units. Charles stepped forward to test the surface. It felt solid beneath his boots. Nodding approvingly, he said, "Excellent. This is brilliant." "Thank you, Mr. Rasat. Charles, if you'll follow me, I'll show you the rest." Gage, his chest swelling with pride, led the way toward the cabin. Close behind came Charles, along with Caesar Courant and a handful of curious scientists. Caesar paused by the railing, peering down at the clustered weapons racks and the sea of solar panels below. His sharp eyes picked out the unusual design of the armaments, but he said nothing, content to watch in silence. Then, as Gage guided them through the corridors, they climbed to the ship's highest floor, eager to see what marvels might await. Charles studied the maze of vertical and horizontal pipes lining the top deck, and then shifted his gaze to the neat rows of bicycle-like machines beneath them. "Mr. Charles," Gage called eagerly, stepping forward, "these pedal generators can power the entire ship. All we need is a team of 100 people pedaling, and their mechanical energy converts directly into electricity. Even in total darkness, we'll top up our reserves here." Gage beamed as Charles circled the 100 pedaling stations. Relief washed over Charles. His last concern had vanished. "Not bad at all," he said, nodding in approval. "You've surpassed my expectations. I'll make good on my promise." Charles's praise sent a thrill through Gage. He straightened, bursting with pride. "Show me the next innovation," he urged. "Follow me," Charles replied with a smile. They stepped into the elevator and descended to the second deck. When the doors slid open, a narrow 2-meter corridor stretched before them, flanked on both sides by tightly packed cabins. "This deck is the crew quarters," Charles explained as they walked forward. "Every cabin here offers a comfortable space for rest and recovery." Gage swung the door open and gestured with a flourish. "This room is 10 square meters and designed for 2 people. Altogether, we can house nearly 1,000 here." Charles stepped inside and was struck by a sense of déjà vu. It looked exactly like the student dorm he'd known in his previous life, only this one felt far roomier, since it held just 2 occupants instead of 5 or 6. He ran a hand along the sleek metal desk and nodded appreciatively. "Not bad at all." Gage smiled. "We still need to bring in the maids, but otherwise it's ready to go." Leading the way, he guided Charles up to the 3rd floor. "Floors 3 and 4 are interconnected," Gage explained as they reached a vast central hall the size of a football field. Sunlight streamed in through high windows, illuminating a row of smaller rooms that ringed the space. "This is where everyone eats and gathers." Surrounding it are the training rooms, fully stocked with every kind of apparatus you requested, even a gravity chamber. Charles surveyed the cavernous area, imagining hundreds of people moving through at once. Gage continued, "We took inspiration from those ocean liners you mentioned, hollowed out the middle to create a true multi-purpose hub, Your comfort requirements have all been met." Charles allowed himself a satisfied grin. Everything looked exactly as he'd hoped. "It looks like I only have a single sentence so far. Could you please provide the full chapter text? Once I have the entire passage, I'll be happy to rewrite it into coherent, idiomatic English, rename Charlotte to Charles, and polish it for an English-speaking audience." Chapter 212. Sea God Poseidon. The moment Charles stepped into the great cabin, his breath caught. Every surface, molded pilasters, soaring archways, even the huge crystal chandelier, was gilded or trimmed in gold leaf. The sheer radiance of the decor proclaimed its owner's wealth, and it was exactly to Charles's taste. He found himself nodding in awe, unable to stop. Gage watched with concealed pride. He'd scoured every available ship design, drawings from the famed Tianlong nobles and beyond, to create a vessel that would dazzle Charles. And now, standing before this golden splendor, he knew he'd succeeded. Even the legendary luxury liners of Tianlong paled in comparison. To pull this off, Gage had tapped into the Valley of the Gods' hidden hoard, risking everything for a display of pure extravagance. "It's perfect," Charles said, voice thick with excitement. "Absolutely incredible." Gage allowed himself a triumphant smile. "I'm glad you approve. Everything you see cost more gold than most kings could dream of spending." Charles swept a hand through the air, brushing the light so that it danced across the gilded walls. "I have nothing but praise. You've outdone yourself." "Then let me show you the rest of the ship," Gage offered. "There's much more to see. This is only the beginning." With that, Charles strode out of the main cabin, Gage close behind, eager to reveal the next marvel of their voyage. Caesar Courant strode up to Gage, gave him a firm thumbs up, then swept his arm toward the hatch. "On deck, quickly!" Charles climbed out onto the deck and stopped to catch his breath. The ship still smelled of fresh paint and hot metal, no surprise for a vessel barely finished. But what really grabbed his attention were the rows of cannon mounts lining the rails. Long, smooth cylinders without any visible muzzles. He frowned. "Gage, what are these guns?" Gage stepped forward and tapped one of the iron carriages proudly. "Not guns, Charles. Railguns, electromagnetic cannons. Each has an effective range of about 500 meters and can punch clean through a pirate ship's hull. We've fitted this ship with 120 of them." Charles blinked. "Railguns? You built these?" Gage shook his head. "I wish. The design was a team effort by the physicists and engineers you see behind us. I just handled the installation." He nodded toward the small group of scientists clustered near the companionway. At his words, they straightened up, faces alight with quiet pride. Charles surveyed the team of physicists and engineers crowning their prototype electromagnetic cannons. It had taken them 2.5 years of relentless effort, and their pride was well earned. He offered them an approving nod. "Outstanding work," he said. "To show my appreciation, I'm boosting your research budget by 50%. Murmurs of excitement rippled through the lab. Even Ivan, standing behind Charles, couldn't completely hide a twitch of surprise at the generous increase. But Charles was clearly in high spirits. He turned to Gage and grinned. "All right, let me try it." Gage's eyes lit up. "Of course, you'll be the first test subject." Charles scanned the room until he spotted a large chunk of reinforced sandstone against the far wall. He pointed. "See that boulder? Let's give it a demonstration." "Consider it done," Gage replied. "But first, come with me. The guns are linked to a central smart control hub." Charles followed Gage down the corridor and up an elevator to the 6th floor. When the doors slid open, he found himself in a spacious command center. Dominating the far wall was a seamless display screen, alive with schematics and live feeds. Gage stood beside a touchscreen console. "From here," he explained, "we can coordinate all 120 electromagnetic cannons. Just select your target on the map, confirm your firing solution, and each gun will open fire in perfect synchrony." Charles stepped forward, anticipation quickening his pulse. The team's hard work was moments away from full-scale demonstration, and he was about to pull the trigger. Charles stepped up to the control console, its panel bristling with buttons and toggles. Gage stood beside him, offering a quick rundown. "Mr. Charles, each electromagnetic cannon has its own button. Just press the one you want, then use the joystick to aim and fire. You can operate them individually or link them together." Though Gage worried the system might overwhelm him, Charles felt a surprising spark of recognition. This looked just like a video game controller. On instinct, he pressed a single button. Immediately, a low hum filled the deck as the linked turrets powered up, electric currents sizzling through their coils. A thrill ran through Charles. Here was the raw force of what they dubbed the 120 million cannon equivalent, all at his fingertips. He tapped Gage on the shoulder. "You take the seat. Fire on that reef over there." Gage slid into the operator's chair, and Charles backed up to watch. "Now," Charles called out, "activate every system. I want to see its full power unleashed." The order surprised Gage, but he moved with decisive speed, flipping switches and slamming buttons in rapid succession. As the consoles lit up and the deck thrummed with energy, a sudden image flashed through Charles's mind. A cartoon man in a crisp white suit and an upturned hat. Charles blinked and realized that Gage, too, was clad head to toe in white, as though that strange apparition had somehow bled into reality. It felt like a silent message, waiting for him to decipher. Charles tapped the final command on the console. "All systems online. Initializing super railgun, ready to fire." In his mind, he silently named the ship's AI voice Gage. The moment the last status lights flickered green, the 120 electromagnetic barrels arrayed along the deck began to hum, drawing a crackling orb of electricity at their muzzles. Gage's calm tone echoed in Charles's head. "Authorization received. Press the red button to commence firing." Charles nodded and lifted his finger. Instantly, the ship shuddered with an immense release of energy. Boom! The super railgun discharged in a thunderous blast that rattled consoles and sent viewers aboard sprawling. On Kamai Island, the roar reached every ear. Islanders turned en masse toward the northwest, where the Rockefeller pirates had gathered. Spies exchanged wary glances, their hands tightening on concealed weapons as they watched the horizon. Through the swirling smoke, even the railgun's inventor couldn't hide his astonishment. The force unleashed by those 120 electromagnetic barrels exceeded all expectations. Charles's jaw set as he studied the aftermath. The concussive shock pressed on him like a warning. Its raw power rivaled his own most overwhelming abilities. As the haze lifted, the sight before them was breathtaking. The massive reef they'd targeted had vanished, leaving only a vast circular crater gouged into the ocean floor. Seawater rushed back into the void, spiraling into a roaring vortex that churned with unstoppable fury. Charles stood at the rail, eyes cold and determined, knowing this single shot had forever changed the balance of power on the high seas. Rip! The air crackled as the electromagnetic cannon discharged. A collective gasp rose from the watching crowd, but Charles stood unmoved. In this world, raw power reigned supreme, and he intended to seize it. An electromagnetic cannon like that was terrifying enough. Yet whispers of the legendary Pluto, who'd supposedly leveled an entire island with a single shot, were even more astonishing. Charles's eyes glittered. That blueprint, the source of such unimaginable force, had to be his. He made a silent vow. For the safety of his family and his own survival in this chaotic age, he would gather every advantage he could. That meant finding Murloc Tom, the eccentric inventor who'd slipped through his grasp before. "I missed him last time," Charles muttered, rubbing his chin. "But this time I won't fail." Behind him lay his newly completed ship, its hull gleaming in the dying light. With it, his journey around the world would finally begin. His clan was vast, his ambitions grand, but he knew better than to rush blindly into danger. Every move would be calculated, every ally chosen with care. The world awaited, and Charles was ready. Chapter 213, The Pace of War. Charles gave one last, approving glance across the deck. "Everything's shipshape. I'll leave the rest to the steward and the maids." With that, he wandered down to the beach, settled into a lounge chair, and let the gentle sea breeze play through his hair. All around him, laughter rang out as a group of bikini-clad girls tumbled in the surf, their carefree joy a perfect accompaniment to the warm sun overhead. He lifted a glass of iced lemonade to his lips. The tart, vibrant flavor puckered his mouth, and he wouldn't have had it any other way. Setting the drink aside, he unfolded the morning's newspaper and scanned the headline in bold type. "Admiral Garp deployed by Navy HQ to trap the Roger pirates at Reverse Mountain's Grand Line entrance." Charles's brow drew together at the Navy's bold proclamation. Why marshal such force right now? But as he read on, a slow smile stretched across his face. Of course, no one catches this era's greatest protagonist with ease. The article went on to describe how the Roger pirates had shattered Garp's encirclement and surged into the Grand Line. Charles chuckled, amusement dancing in his eyes. They must be out of their minds if they think they can contain them, he murmured, folding the newspaper with satisfied confidence. Charles's greatest pleasure was seeing the Navy's power drained. They belonged to rival factions, and he could hardly hide his satisfaction whenever they suffered a setback. He flipped the report on his desk and paused at the next dispatch detailing events in the New World. Flying Fleet strikes again. Kingdoms aligned with the world government have been razed, and their king has been slain. The headline was emblazoned in blood-red type. Charles frowned. Has Shiji grown impatient? He's been silent for nearly 2 years. This isn't like him. He studied the tragic news of the fallen kingdom, shook his head, and then spotted the newest intelligence lying atop the stack. His eyes narrowed. They've got some nerve, he muttered. We, the Rockefeller pirates, never fired the first shot, yet they still treat me, Charles Rockefeller, like an easy target. He slammed the report onto the table. It's about time I reminded those kingdoms what the Rockefeller pirates can do. Charles set the paper down and picked up his communicator. Just days earlier, the cost of every essential raw material feeding Kame Island's operations had jumped by over 30%. Clearly, this was no random fluctuation, but a carefully timed conspiracy, a united front of his adversaries. And he intended to dismantle it piece by piece. Under Charles's leadership, Kame Island has blossomed into a bustling hub, yet it remains tiny and utterly dependent on imported resources. The island's prosperity has not gone unnoticed. Neighboring nations, greedy for raw materials, have begun circling like sharks. For Charles, who deliberately chose Kame as his stronghold, this attention cuts deep. From the moment he claimed the island, Charles methodically upgraded its defenses, expanded its ports, and fostered new industries. He balanced each development with a fair but firm taxation system, and the revenues now bankroll the Rockefeller pirates. Numbering nearly 2,000, this crew of elite swordsmen has taken refuge under Charles's banner over the past few years, drawn by both his vision and his purse. That purse is a costly affair. Charles's personal income runs well into the hundreds of thousands of Baileys every month, yet he channels 2 to 3 million Baileys into pirate wages alone. Without Kame's thriving economy and the taxes it generates, sustaining such a force would be impossible. After all, these men are pirates first and soldiers second, and the new world they roam is a lawless nightmare. Since the Golden Lion Shiki's infamous assault, every opportunistic crew in the seas has set its sights on Kame, hoping to carve out their own slice of its hard-won wealth. The second half of the New World had grown restless. For years, the John pirates had done little but lounge aboard their flagship, reluctant to spend even a fraction of the vast hoard their captain John had amassed. Finally, that idle patience snapped. They descended on Hive Island with fire and steel, looting every storehouse and reducing its fortifications to rubble. In skirmish after skirmish over the past few months, the John pirates proved they would no longer be content simply to sit on their treasure. They would take all they could. Not far behind them, Charlotte Linlin, better known to the world as Big Mom, returned to the high seas with a vengeance. With her brood now grown, Linlin was free of distractions. She dispatched her fleet in every direction, hunting down exotic animals and coveted devil fruits. Her insatiable appetite for sweets had once toppled kingdoms. Now her ruthless raids sent rulers scrambling to protect their people. Word spread that her bounty was climbing so fast she might soon eclipse even the legendary Captain Charles. And Kaido, the so-called strongest creature in the world, refused to be outdone. He scoured the archipelago for Zoan fruits and the fiercest fighters available, forging them into the unstoppable force known as the 100 Beasts Pirates. Island after island felt the wrath of his onslaught as villages were burned and rivals crushed beneath Kaido's iron will. In the midst of this chaos, only 2 great powers remained conspicuously at peace: the Whitebeard pirates, whose stability was as immovable as the man himself, and the Rockefeller pirates, whose true ambitions were veiled in secrecy. Yet recent sightings of Paul Rockefeller's fleet hinted that their calm was merely the eye of the storm. Rockefeller was gathering his strength for something momentous. Against this backdrop of looming conflict, Charles, formerly known as Charlotte, raised his own flag for the first time in years. He called to arms more than 2,000 battle-hardened sailors, each sworn to carve their names into pirate legend. The seas had never been more dangerous, nor more ripe for the taking. As rival fleets prepared to clash across the New World, Captain Charles stood ready to strike, determined that his story would be heard above the din of cannon fire and the roar of monsters. Chapter 7. The four captains, Carter, Paul, Isaac, and Wolfe, moved out at Charles Rockefeller's command, launching a swift, coordinated strike on the islands encircling Kamai. Rich with lumber, fresh water, and hidden coves, these islets were either nominally claimed by distant kingdoms or belonged to no one at all. The shifting alliances among the surrounding realms had tested Charles's patience. He refused to remain a pawn in their power games. It was time to remind everyone exactly who Rockefeller Charles was. He unleashed his entire pirate force, over 2,000 seasoned fighters, organizing them under trusted lieutenants. Their orders were simple: take every island at once. In recognition of his valor at Bundy Wald, Charles entrusted the operation to Barrett. It was Barrett's first taste of independent command, part reward and part on-the-job training. Barrett's assault exceeded all expectations. In a single, audacious sweep, he secured a dozen islands and raised the Rockefeller banner over each one. Charles's holdings had multiplied fivefold overnight. Such explosive growth, however, came at a cost. Manpower was stretched to the breaking point. Reinforcements were days away, and skirmishes with disgruntled islanders threatened to flare up at any moment. Desperate to fill the garrisons, Charles made an unorthodox decision. He ordered his entire corps of personal maids into service. Clad now in light leather and bearing sidearms, they would thread the narrow passes, reinforce the outposts, and ensure that these new territories stayed firmly under Rockefeller control. The war had only just begun, and Charles intended to see it won. Chapter 7. Rising Tensions. Charles's strategy hinged on one simple truth: blood ties carried more weight than a purse of gold. Many of his envoys were noble-born maidens, daughters of the New World's kings and dukes, sent to the newly claimed islands to map resources, forge alliances with local chieftains, and secure loyalty. It was a far cry from the Shiji pirates, who demanded only a protection fee and vanished. Charles intended to bind these territories permanently to his banner, not merely extract tribute. Unsurprisingly, this policy earned him the enmity of several monarchs. Never underestimate the New World kingdoms. Each might be small, but all boasted disciplined armies and iron-willed generals. As Charles's influence crept ever westward, their leaders bristled. In the vaulted council chamber of the Kingdom of Vorland, tempers flared. General Arkoff slammed his gauntleted fist on the marble dais, his gray eyes blazing. "Your Majesty," he roared, "the Rockefeller pirates have grown intolerable. They've seized 2 of our islands and brazenly refused to stop. If we do nothing now, Rockefeller's black sails will blot out every horizon we hold." King Renard, shrunken and silver-haired but still exuding regal authority, studied the general in silence. At last he spoke, his voice low and measured. "General Arkov's warning is just," he declared. "A lawless fleet has usurped our territory without so much as a declaration of war. We cannot allow them to plunder our seas unchecked." A ripple of agreement swept through the gathered nobles and officers. Swords met shields in a thunderous salute, war cries echoing beneath the gilded arches. Thus, Vorland's war drums began to beat, heralding a swift and decisive counterstrike against the Rockefeller pirates. The clash to decide control of these contested islands, and perhaps the fate of the New World itself, was now inevitable. Charles had overstepped. He directly infringed on their interests. After all, each of those islands claimed its own territory. Chapter 214. The Five-Nation Allied Forces. A sudden uproar filled the grand throne room. Ministers, generals, and nobles jostled for the old king's attention, their voices echoing off marble pillars. Yet the monarch remained motionless, his inscrutable gaze fixed on the assembled court. "Your Majesty," cried one of the chief counselors, "we must take action immediately. Rockefeller's pirates are heading straight for our shores." Still the king said nothing. The tension in the hall rose until several venerable officials could no longer contain their fear. With trembling hands, they dropped to their knees before the throne, tears staining their cheeks. The king's expression darkened. He rose from his seat, his robes rustling like a warning. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice steady, "do you think I'm unaware of our situation? Consider carefully. Do you truly believe we can defeat Rockefeller's forces?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Rockefeller's name carried weight across every sea. As the world's foremost swordsman and the scourge of merchant fleets, he was a legend of terror and skill. Even now, tales of his ruthless raids spread fear in every harbor. The king paced a few paces, then spoke again. "If war breaks out, can we possibly prevail against the Rockefeller pirates? Against a man of such renown and ferocity?" He paused, turning his steely eyes on the kneeling ministers. "Think honestly. What chance have we with only 2,000 troops?" A deathly silence followed. Finally, one minister cleared his throat and spoke, voice wavering. "Your Majesty, with just 2,000 soldiers, we stand no chance." Whispers rippled through the hall. Faced with an invader of unrivaled prowess, the gathered lords knew they had to seek allies. If a single kingdom could not withstand Rockefeller's assault, perhaps a coalition of 5 nations could. And so, as fear and resolve warred in their hearts, they began to scheme the one strategy still capable of saving their realm, uniting with neighboring powers to form the 5-nation allied forces. As far as anyone could tell, the Rockefeller pirates mustered no more than 2,000 men. Against our 50,000, the advantage clearly lay with us. The hall fell silent for a moment, as hesitant nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Stepping forward, General Roland's voice rang out, steady and confident. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing low, 50,000 against 2,000, we cannot fail. Grant us leave to march at once and reclaim our lost homelands." His words broke the tension. One by one, wavering ministers and lords straightened their backs and echoed his plea. Bowing in unison, they awaited the king's decree. King Alderic stood motionless on his dais, his eyes distant and troubled. At last, he closed them and lifted a hand in quiet resolve. "Very well," he said softly. "The matter is yours." A ripple of relieved smiles swept through the chamber. Officers and nobles filed out, already discussing supply lines and battle formations. Unaware of the calamity their chosen course would unleash, they hurried off to marshal their forces and march on the enemy. Charles had no clue that a coalition was already forming against him, an entire army being assembled with the sole purpose of bringing him down. Frankly, even if he'd known, he would have laughed. In the face of true power, sheer numbers are meaningless. Right now, Charles was buried under paperwork. Every afternoon, after the maids delivered their endless stacks of reports and petitions, he would settle into his study and methodically sort through them. He'd imagined that once his new ship was finished, he'd sail off at once, leave these islands behind, and finally taste real freedom. But instead, one crisis after another kept pulling him back. 9 times out of 10, life felt downright unfair. At last, the ship was complete, its hull gleaming and its decks freshly varnished. A team of artisans was already adding the final decorative touches. Charles could almost feel the wind in his hair as he pictured himself steering his family toward the open ocean. Yet he knew better than to depart while the neighboring kingdoms still posed a threat. No, he had to secure his home first. Before he could hoist anchor, he intended to remind every ruler in the region, Kame Island belongs to him, and anyone foolish enough to challenge him would soon learn that Charles was not someone to be trifled with. Chapter 8. Only then could Charles set sail with a clear conscience. Boom, boom, boom. A sharp knock rattled the study door. "Come in!" Charles called without looking up. The door swung open, and a tall figure strode inside. Charles recognized him immediately. "Barrett, have a seat," he said, still absorbed in the reports before him. "What news do you bring?" Barrett paused by the desk, then saluted. "Captain, during our recent overseas expansion, we've infringed on the interests of several kingdoms. According to my latest intelligence, many rulers are already covertly mustering forces to strike back at us." He placed a neatly bound dossier on the desk. Charles couldn't suppress a laugh. "Oh, they dare threaten us? I'd like to see who has the nerve." Charles laid down his pen and opened the dossier. His smile faded the moment he surveyed its contents. Good heavens, he whispered. There are so many? His eyes widened. The list of hostile armies was far larger than he'd ever imagined. Chapter X. The Eight-Nation Alliance. Charles surveyed the War Council's grand chamber with quiet amusement. 8 kingdoms, each weak on its own, had banded together against him. He could scarcely hide a grin. Commander Barrett stood at his side, voice measured. Your Highness, they've formed the 8-nation allied forces. We already hold the islands of 7 kingdoms. The 8th will fall soon under diplomatic pressure. Combined, they boast close to 250,000 soldiers, but their naval strength is negligible. Charles tapped the edge of the dossier between them. Excellent. I leave the details to you. If you encounter any obstacles, inform me immediately. I trust your judgment. He snapped the booklet shut and flicked it toward Barrett. Proceed. Barrett caught it effortlessly, bowed, and departed. He had no intention of waiting for the allied kings to strike first. Action was his nature. In the War Council chamber, flickering torchlight danced across massive battle maps pinned to oak tables. Barrett summoned every Legion captain, except those of the 2nd Brigade, to finalize the operation. Once assembled, Barrett addressed them with crisp authority. Gentlemen, our primary target is King Rommel of the Northern Alliance. He is the key figure holding their coalition together. We will neutralize him swiftly and decisively. When Rommel falls, the rest will lose heart and fracture. Admiral Barlow inclined his head. Sir, I will blockade Rommel's coastal fortress with our fleet. Captain Reyes traced a road on the map. My land forces will advance from the east. We'll synchronize our assault at dawn. Barrett nodded. Precisely. All other units remain on standby to reinforce or create diversions as required. Timing and coordination are critical. The captains pored over the maps, confirming troop movements and signal protocols. Within the hour, they dispersed to mobilize their detachments. As the War Council emptied, Barrett allowed himself a faint smile. Let the Allied kings think their sheer numbers would prevail. In this campaign, strategy and precision would do what brute force could not. And under Charles's command, victory was already within their grasp. As long as we take out their leader, the rest won't be a threat. Barrett's order rang down the pier. Though barely 12 years old, he'd been raised in the army since infancy. Every crisp salute and decisive gesture belied the inexperience of his youth. The captains, seasoned freebooters used to answering only to the sea, felt a twinge of unease, but they fell into line without question. At the docks, 15 ships flew the black Rockefeller flag. Under shouts of Carter, Paul, Wolf, AAC, armed pirate crews swarmed aboard, hauling crates of ammunition and powder onto the decks. Standing at the head of the pier, Barrett, just 4 feet tall, but commanding as any general, marshaled his boarding parties with calm precision. His lieutenants Carter, Paul, Wolf, and Isaac bellowed orders in turn, directing their men to prepare weapons, check powder stores, and ready the boarding ladders. The spectacle caught the eye of every curious bystander on the quay. Rumors flickered through the crowd until one observer cried out, Alert the Navy headquarters. The Rockefeller pirates are mobilizing. Target unknown. From hidden alcoves and shadowed alleyways, spies hurried to relay the news to their masters. After all, since Charles had declared this island a free port, every naval force and privateer company passed through its channels, and none could ignore a Rockefeller armada on the move. The island's lax security made life easy for enemy agents. Kime Island was more sieve than fortress. Roughly 1 out of every 10 people might be a spy for a rival faction. As those operatives relayed their intelligence, ship after ship quietly weighed anchor and slipped out of the harbor. Yet nobody noticed the lone figure in white moving among the ropes and planks. Charles, clad head to toe in silken white, slipped up the gangway as silently as a shadow, vanishing into the bustle just as the last vessel drifted away. Chapter 215, Sea Battle. The storm-tossed sea heaved beneath leaden skies as 2 fleets squared off on the open water. From his ship's deck, Admiral Barrett of the Rockefeller Pirates studied the distant line of over 50 sleek warships belonging to the 8-power Allied fleet. He allowed himself a contemptuous grin. 15 pirate vessels against 50 enemy warships. Barrett saw nothing but opportunity. Open fire, he barked. A thunderous chorus answered. The pirates' cannons roared, spitting iron shot into the gray air. Bang! 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 Dozens of shells screamed toward the Allied line, crashing into the waves. Most plunged into the frothing sea, but a few struck home, splintering wood and sending enemy sailors scrambling for cover. "Reload! Fire again!" Barrett roared. His crew worked like a well-oiled machine, ramming fresh powder charges into their guns and unleashing another savage volley. Across the water, the 8-power Allied fleet was equally prepared. Their return fire was swift and accurate, iron shot whistling over the pirate decks in a deadly counter-assault. Aboard the grand flagship behind the Allied lines, a group of nobles watched from under gilded awnings. They held crystal glasses of wine in delicate hands and exchanged bored glances as the distant cannonade rattled the air. "A pirate's a pirate," one aristocrat declared with a curl of his lip. "Nothing but savages. They'll break and run before long." He took a leisurely sip, convinced that the overwhelming might of the Allied fleet would soon shatter the Rockefeller pirates and turn the roaring sea into their triumph lap. "Let us toast to our coming victory." A nobleman at the head of the long table raised his goblet, and every pirate around him followed suit, draining their wine in a single swallow. In their eyes, over 50 pirate ships closing on the war fleet of the 8-nation Allied forces was all the assurance they needed. They were certain the Rockefeller pirates would triumph. On deck, the thunder of cannon fire resumed. Gunners from both sides pushed their pieces to the limit, hurling shot and shell until the sea spray turned red with gunpowder smoke. An hour passed in a deafening artillery duel, each side emptying its magazines to batter the opponent's hull. When the last powder charges were spent, both commanders shouted the same command in furious unison. "Board them! Show the world the might of the Rockefeller pirates." 4 meters tall and broad as a fortress wall, Barrett planted himself by the main rudder, roaring out flag signals. One by one, the pirate captains read his orders and steered their vessels straight into the crippled Allied warships. Remarkably, not a single pirate ship had gone down, even after an hour under relentless bombardment. A handful of Allied ships lay badly damaged, splintered decks, shattered rigging, broken masts. Barrett grinned, wiping smoke from his brow. "Our lads never cared much for cannon drills," he announced. "We fight with steel, not shot." He swept a hand toward the boarding hooks swinging from every rail. All of these cutthroats were swordsmen, hand-picked by Captain Charles himself and honed in blade work. Let the enemy's gunners fire all they liked. The real battle would be won in the melee on deck, where a quick slash and a steady parry meant life or death. With that, Barrett gave the final signal. The pirate crews braced their cutlasses, tightened their belts, and readied the grappling hooks. Below decks, Charles watched through the hatch, his calm eyes glittering with anticipation. Soon, the clash of steel would drown out the echo of cannon fire, and the Rockefeller pirates would carve their legend across the decks of the defeated Allied fleet. The thunder of cannon fire had dwindled to nothing more than a rattling backdrop. Each shot from the pirate fleet was neatly cut down by our gunners before it could threaten a single plank. After an hour of this one-sided artillery duel, the real battle was about to begin. 15 black-hulled pirate ships advanced in grim formation, our intent unmistakable. On the deck of the Empire's flagship, Lieutenant General Albrecht raised his cavalry saber high and stamped his boot on the wooden rail. "Men of the 8-power Allied fleet," he roared, "today we strike the first and the final blow. Show these cutthroats exactly who holds the true might of the Empire. No quarter. Kill them all." A thunderous "Kill!" thundered back as muskets were cocked and cutlasses drawn. Flintlock pistols hung at belts. Long knives glinted sharply under the sun. Fear vanished from every sailor's eyes, replaced by grim determination. With a unified cry, the two fleets crashed together. Boarding planks were thrown, and the sharp clang of steel on steel rang out. Marines swarmed across the bulwarks. Grapeshot and musket balls shredded sails overhead, but no one halted. Charles vaulted onto the pirate flagship's deck, forcing his way through a tangle of frenzied combatants. He pressed forward, scanning for the pirate commander. Finally, at the rear of the quarterdeck, he spotted him, a hulking veteran cloaked in oil-dark leather, his eyes like cold embers beneath a mop of greasy hair. "Pirates!" Charles shouted, brandishing his saber. The pirate general snarled in response, hefting a massive cutlass. With a roar, the giant lunged. Steel sang as they met, two wills clashing in the heart of the maelstrom, and so the decisive battle began. Clad in gleaming plate armor, the kingdom's formidable knight swung his broadsword at Charles with brutal force. "Impressive," the knight sneered. "You're not only well-armed, but terrifyingly fierce. I suppose we shouldn't underestimate these pirates after all." Charles cracked a wry smile, and then delivered a thunderous punch. The knight's armor groaned under the impact, his body rattling from the blow. If the creaking deck hadn't been so treacherous, Charles would have unleashed his devil form long ago. "Pirate scum!" the knight spat, staggering back. "Don't think you can discount us. I've faced harsher storms than you'll ever know." Still unbowed, the knight lunged forward. "Fine. You talk a big game. Let's see if your skin is as tough as your words." Charles rolled his shoulders, braced himself against the ship's sway, and sprang back into the fray. Even without tapping his full strength on the lurching deck, he pressed the knight relentlessly, driving him onto the defensive. Steel rang on steel with each blow, sparks showering around them. All the while, the Rockefeller pirates erupted into combat around them. At the signal, their veteran swordsmen surged forward, cutting through the kingdom's soldiers in a disciplined whirlwind of steel. Despite the royal force's superior numbers, the pirates' ferocity and coordination kept the outcome teetering in the balance. The flagship's general was backed by Carter's veteran officers, and the two fleets were locked in a furious exchange of cannon fire and steel. Amid the chaos, a small figure slipped quietly out of the captain's cabin and onto the deck. She paused at the rail, eyes alight as she took in the swirling battle around her. "For Admiral Rockefeller!" she cried, and plunged into the fray. Lieutenant Estes, no more than 5'2" in height, wielded a western saber almost as long as she was. Clad in a spotless white uniform, her silvery blue hair glinted in the sun as she cut down any pirate who dared cross her path, rallying the crew with every swing of her blade. "Miss Estes?" Commander Isaac Esdeath, standing nearest to the Admiral's quarters, stared in disbelief. His jaw dropped, then clenched in alarm. "By Neptune, why are you here? Form a protective circle around her now. If anything happens to Miss Estes, you'll answer for it with your lives." He barked orders and charged forward, shielding her with his guards. But the marauders weren't about to let the Royal Navy catch its breath. A grizzled pirate leapt from a boarding plank, cutlass raised. "Trying to run, are you, Navy dogs?" he snarled, and the pirates surged in behind him. Estes met the onslaught without hesitation, her battle cry ringing out once more. "For Admiral Rockefeller. Don't get cocky. If you want to leave, you'll have to go through me first." The general planted himself in front of Isaac, blade drawn, voice booming. Isaac glanced helplessly at the furious officer as enemy troops fanned out behind him. There was nothing he could do but carry out his orders the enemy now heard as well. "Retreat! Pull back!" Isaac called, but one of the opposing captains misheard. "Quick! Seize that little girl. She's the key to our victory." At the captain's command, squads of soldiers closed in on Charles. Only 8 years old, he nevertheless held the family heirloom blade, its techniques passed down by his father, and the instant he saw his foes surround him, he sprang forward. In a heartbeat, he cut down 7 or 8 men in rapid succession, each strike precise and deadly. A dark, exhilarating laugh tore from his throat. "Ha! Is this what killing feels like, I think? I like it. Master Charles, what are you doing? This is far too dangerous. Step back." Isaac charged in, panic in his eyes. But Charles stood rooted in the center of the clearing, intoxicated by the clash of steel and the surge of victory. "Get her!" another captain cried, seizing on the mistake. "Rockefeller Charlotte's daughter. Capture her, and the battle is ours." More soldiers pressed in, weapons raised, convinced they were closing in on an important hostage. But at the heart of the assault stood not a girl at all, but the boy they called Charles, blade in hand, unyielding and more dangerous than any of them had guessed. Chapter 216, Protecting Miss Estes. The din of battle rolled across the open field. Under a scorching sky, gunfire and the clash of steel filled the air. Amid the chaos, a small, determined figure darted through the fray, blade flashing with every desperate parry. Each strike left only a faint scar in the dust, but every enemy downed was a life snuffed out. "Move her back! Now!" came the urgent cry. Charles, barely more than a boy, yet already a knight of promise, plunged forward to shield the young noblewoman. Around them, pirates pressing the attack hesitated as he wove a protective arc with his sword. One buccaneer swung a cutlass, only to have it snapped aside by Charles's deft blade. "Miss Estes, please, it's too dangerous here," one of the palace guards shouted, gesturing for her to retreat. Rockefeller Estes bristled. Her chest rose with patriotic fury. "Retreat?" she spat. "How can I fall back at a moment like this? I'm Rockefeller Estes. My name demands I stand fast, and my pride won't suffer me to be a deserter." With that declaration, she stepped between Charles and his would-be assailants. But Charles would not be held back. He shook off the guard's restraining hand, then caught the sunlight on the holy badge pinned at his breast, a gift from his father on his 5th birthday, the emblem of his knighthood. "Stay behind me," he called, voice bright and unyielding. Then, without another word, he charged the circle of pirates converging on them. A hush fell over the raiders as Charles cut his way through them. His blade moved like lightning, swift, precise, unrelenting. One by one, the cutthroats tumbled back, giving ground to the boy who defied them all. Watching him break free, the palace swordsmen exchanged awed looks. Then one raised his voice. "All units, form a protective line around Miss Estes. Protect the lady. Form up. Protect Miss Rockefeller Estes." And so, amid the roar of cannon and the shrieks of wounded men, a new chorus rose, a single cry of defense for the eldest daughter of House Estes. As soldiers rallied to her side, Charles pressed on, determined to carve a path of safety through the savage battle, and prove that courage and loyalty, however small their bearer, could turn the tide of war. Everyone turned to stare, Barrett included. He couldn't look away. And when he finally took it all in, his heart sank. Charles was here. Who on earth had let him slip into the battle zone? Anger and anxiety warred in the old general's chest as Charles strode deeper among the enemy ranks. The weight of Barrett's sword suddenly felt oppressive. Even his battle-scarred hands trembled. Ahead, Lady Esdeth moved like a ghost through no man's land. Surrounded by her royal swordsmen, she seemed unstoppable. No foe dared block her path. With a whispered command, she conjured a handful of razor-sharp ice daggers between her palms. "Ice shards," she hissed, and the frosty projectiles flew. Enemy soldiers fell like pins. At her back, Charles let out a fierce whoop. "Rockefeller troops, you picked the wrong side today." He surged forward, every stride devouring distance. The swordsmen escorting Esdeth exchanged knowing glances. Then, with a single cry, "Protect the eldest lady!" They dropped their white cloaks to reveal knightly armor beneath. In unison, they charged the remnants of the 8-nation allied force massed on the ship's deck. Swords rang, steel blossomed in the sun, and the tide of battle shifted before their eyes. Chapter 10: The Frozen Siege. After 2 savage boarding attempts, the deck of the warship lay strewn with fallen soldiers. Wave upon wave of warriors had tried to storm the enemy vessel, only to be cut down by cannon fire and steel. Yet Sir Estes refused to admit defeat. He swept his gaze over the nearest combat zone and raised his sword high. "Men, the battle is far from over. Rally to me, and we will triumph," he roared, swinging the hilt of sanctuary as if it alone could turn the tide. Before anyone could stop him, he sprinted to the ship's railing and hurled himself into the freezing air. Officers rushed forward, desperate to hold him back, and to prevent him from diving into the icy sea in his obsession to save General Esdeth. But in their panic, they'd forgotten the true danger of their foe. A moment later, a blast of frigid air exploded from the water's surface. When the mist cleared, Esdeth stood majestically on a vast, gleaming ice road that stretched across the churning waves. Each time she shifted her weight, the dark sea beneath her feet froze solid, forging a pathway deeper into the ocean. "Charge!" cried a young swordsman, his voice cracking with urgency. Without a second thought, he leapt onto the ice. The surface rang like crystal under his boots, deceptively solid in the midst of the roaring sea. "Move!" he called back, gesturing for the others. One by one, the remaining soldiers tumbled over the railing, scrambling onto the frozen bridge. Hearts pounding, they pressed forward across the transparent ice, determined to reach Esdeth before she could turn the entire ocean against them. Far below, the wind howled through the rigging, and the gleaming ice road stretched onward, an unbreakable prison of frost, with the Ice Empress at its center. One of the swordsmen slid down first, shouting up to the deck, "She's on her feet!" Encouraged by his cry, the rest of the company lost their nerves. They vaulted down one after another, their voices rising in unison. "Protect the lady!" They surged along the path Lady Esdeath had carved out. By then, Esdeath herself had already slipped across the water and onto the pirate ship. The melee on deck was brutal, but with her swordsmen swarming aboard, the Rockefeller pirates' formation quickly buckled. "Press the attack! Swing around and support the men on the next vessel!" Esdeath roared, sweat and grit streaking her face, yet she stood perfectly firm. Miss! This time, a handful of her closest guards, anticipating her charge, grasped her arms to hold her back. Esdeath's eyes flamed. "What are you doing? They're still fighting. Those rogues could outflank our troops at any second." The lead guard forced a wry smile. "Forgive us, miss, but it's far too dangerous. If anything happened to you, your father would never forgive us. Please, stay here and oversee the battle from safety." Esdeath hesitated. The tension in her shoulders eased as she recognized their fear wasn't born of doubt in her abilities, but in loyalty to her well-being. With a curt nod, she allowed herself to be led to a vantage point, her gaze never leaving the furious clash below. Other swordsmen blocked Esdeath's path to the deck's edge. She slammed a fist against her captor's arm and shouted, "Bastard! How can I stand by while our soldiers bleed? I'm the eldest daughter of the Rockefeller family. I have a duty here. Let me go. Every second counts when a life is at stake." Charles, who had been restrained just behind her, watched the exchange in silence. Esdeath's fierce outburst cut through the murmur of onlookers, and for a moment everyone forgot their orders. The swordsman holding Charles hesitated, then, caught by the young heiress's determination, released him. Esdeath threw back her head and laughed, the sound ringing triumphantly across the deck. "Warriors, to me, now!" She strode to the prow, drew her Western-style blade, and bellowed, "Forward!" At once the troops on deck lifted their weapons and roared their approval. The ship surged ahead, cleaving through the enemy formation toward the very heart of the opposing fleet. To one side, a lavish, gilded vessel had been trailing them ever since the skirmish began. Esdeath had longed to board it and see its splendors. Now, with battle lines converging, she would have her chance. On the rival ship's deck, soldiers and spectators alike craned their necks, eyes fixed on the bow where the Rockefeller heiress stood, sword raised high. "What are they planning?" they whispered among themselves, hearts pounding as she led her men straight into the fray. I was stunned to see her turn straight for the Eight Kingdoms patrol ship, the very vessel assigned to observe the battle. What is she thinking? Don't let her through. Protect the dignitaries. The assembled generals roared, shoving sailors into action to intercept Esdeath's pirate vessel. But no matter their orders, Esdeath's ship simply outsized theirs in speed. That's a pirate's top priority, after all. "Pathetic," Barrett muttered, flicking blood from his blade without sparing a glance for the dying general slumped on deck. In the next heartbeat, he leapt aboard a nearby warship, and carnage erupted. With the senior officer already out of the way, none of those soldiers stood a chance against him. Chapter 217, The Battle of Estes. A sudden commotion shattered the revelry aboard the grand flagship. A breathless aide burst into the captain's cabin. "My lord, a pirate ship is closing fast. Should we give chase? Open fire?" The guests, high-born nobles in dazzling attire, paused from their toasts. They'd been celebrating their latest victory, confident in the two warships escorting them. The admiral, draped in crimson and gold, set down his crystal goblet and raised an eyebrow. "A lone pirate, you say? At this distance?" The aide raised a brass spyglass. "Through here, sir. It appears to be a young boy." "A boy?" The admiral frowned. Around the polished deck, the courtiers leaned forward, intrigued. "Let me see." One especially loud noble barked orders to the guards. In an instant, the spyglass was passed to him. He pressed it to his eye and studied the tiny vessel swirling in the open sea. On that pirate ship's deck stood a single figure, a youth in a crisp white uniform, silver blue hair resting on his shoulders, a Western broadsword strapped at his side that looked almost as tall as he was. With commanding gestures, he rallied a handful of ragged sailors to their oars, spurring them on with surprising zeal. The noble set down the glass, eyes gleaming. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Delightfully bold and utterly adorable, I'd rather like to make him my personal prize." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembly. Their laughter carried out over the waves, an arrogant, underestimating sound that would soon meet an unexpected challenge. Charles stood at the edge of the marble plaza, scarcely believing his eyes. A cluster of gilded carriages had disgorged half a dozen nobles, and they'd immediately descended into chaos over the lone young woman standing in their midst. "She's mine now! Anyone who dares challenge me, step up," one baron declared, striding forward and stretching out his cloak as if marking claim. "Silence," another shouted. "Whoever snatches her first gets 1,000,000 berries. No arguments." "Perfect. Whoever wins her hand also wins her freedom," a count proclaimed, tossing his head back in laughter as he eyed the girl. Instantly, the nobles surged around her, jostling elbows, flinging insults. But within moments, they paused. A tall viscount brandished a gold coin. "Soldier, seize her for me. 1,000,000 berries, cash up front." That broke the dam. 2,000,000, cried a marquise. "I'll double his offer if your man drags her to my carriage." 3,000,000, a duke shot back. 4,000,000 and 4,100,000, barked a prince, splashing silver on the ground so loudly it rang like thunder. "By the gods, are you serious?" one baron spluttered. "Cut it out! You can't even cover your own bids," another snarled. "If you can't pay, stop spouting off." Coins skittered across the marble. Tables and heraldic screens toppled. The plaza echoed with shouts and clattering metal. Charles took a careful step back. These weren't just feuding nobles, they represented the 8-nation allied forces, each contender from a different member country. Rivalries ran deep, and it showed in every spiteful barb and desperate bid. Amid the uproar, a dozen soldiers in crisp uniforms formed a loose circle near the palace steps, eyes darting between their officers and the bickering aristocrats. At their head stood Major General Arland, his polished breastplate gleaming in the noon sun. "Major General," one lieutenant called, hurrying up. "What are your orders, sir?" Arland frowned, placing a gauntleted hand on his sword hilt. He glanced at the nobles, then at the girl, her face pale but determined, as though she'd expected this madness all along. "Hold your positions," he said calmly. "Under no circumstances will we allow an abduction on palace grounds. Anyone who lays a hand on her will find themselves in irons." The lieutenant nodded and barked a quick command. The soldiers snapped to attention, forming a protective ring around the girl. The nobles, no longer sure they could win through bribery alone, hesitated as well. Charles exhaled, tension draining from his shoulders. The contest had been called off, at least for now, but in a place where fortunes changed on a single bet, he knew this girl's fate was far from settled. Chapter 1. Clash at Sea. Charles stood at the prow of his small cutter, the salty breeze tossing his dark hair. Far ahead, a grand pirate ship plowed through the mist, its decks bristling with armed men. At its helm stood a broad-shouldered general, one hand resting casually on the pommel of a massive greatsword. "Ready to fight," the general called, his voice deceptively calm. He raised the blade and fixed Charles with a steely glare. From the way his shoulders tensed, Charles knew this opponent was no ordinary buccaneer. Around him, Charles's crew readied cutlasses and boarding pikes. The cutter lurched forward and slammed into the larger vessel with a thunderous crack of wood on wood. "For the glory of the Rockefeller pirates, kill them all!" the general roared, and his men surged across the narrowing gap. "Defend the ship! Repel the pirates!" Charles shouted in reply, his sword leaping from its sheath in a flash of steel. Blades met with ringing clangs as the two forces collided. Amid the chaos, Charles sprinted through the fray, determined to face the imposing general head-on. Sparks flew when their swords clashed, a brutal, echoing shock that sent splinters flying. "Your name, little pirate," the general demanded as he drove Charles back with a heavy downward slash. Charles sidestepped, the blow whistling past his ear, then riposted, his blade carving a shallow gash across the general's shoulder. The older man staggered back, astonished. "I am the eldest son of the Rockefeller family," Charles cried, voice ringing across the deck. "My name is Charles Rockefeller." A hush fell over the immediate area as friend and foe alike recognized the name. The general's eyes widened. He had just dueled the living heir of the world's greatest swordsman, one of the 4 legendary pirates of the New World. "Charles Rockefeller," the general muttered, awe and unease flickering across his face. I should have known. He glanced around at the raging battle, then back at the confident boy before him. This is no place for you, boy. Charles held the general's gaze unwavering. Around them, swords rose once more, shields clashed, and the deck erupted in renewed fury. The Rockefeller legacy had arrived, and this day's battle would be etched in pirate lore forever. Major General Valen's greatsword swung in a wide arc, sending Esdeath's western sword clattering from her hand. Effortlessly, he sheathed his massive blade and leveled a cold stare at her. Don't get cocky, he warned. We're on opposite sides here. Esdeath's eyes flared. She braced herself as the blessing of the sanctified lands pulsed beneath her feet, shaking the stone beneath them. In the next instant, she surged forward, vaulting nearly 3 meters high. At the apex of her leap, she snatched up her sword and brought it down in a blistering slash. Steel rang against steel as her blade met Valen's defense. He met her blow without missing a heartbeat. A flicker of admiration crossed his features. As expected of the world's greatest swordsman's daughter, he said, your technique is devilishly clever. Valen shifted his stance, easily absorbing her next strike. Don't flatter yourself, he cautioned. I've had masters of my own. Esdeath's jaw clenched at his words. Narrowing her eyes, she renewed her assault, forcing the general to step back with each sweep of her blade. Panting, she managed a glare worthy of her lineage. I'll admit it, I envy you. Not everyone gets a legendary teacher guiding their blade. With that, they clashed once more. 2 warriors bound by blood and honor, each determined to prove who truly deserved the title of greatest swordsman. Charles paced the marble floor of the great hall, his dark eyes restless with worry. Beside him, Jenny's trembling hands dashed away tears as she tried to meet his gaze. It had been 2 days since Captain Esdeath vanished without a trace, and no amount of searching among the barracks or questioning the guards had produced so much as a clue. Half a day's ride away, in the Emperor's training yard, Esdeath had been sparring with General Barrett, the Empire's celebrated swordsman. Barrett's blade sang through the air, fast, precise, utterly ruthless, while Esdeath parried each stroke with elegance and resolve. For long moments, the two were perfectly matched. Clang, 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 sparks flew under the midday sun. Still, Barrett's years of experience slowly tipped the balance in his favor. In the end, one deft riposte sent Esdeath off balance, her chest heaving as she recovered her stance. The general sheathed his sword with a haughty grin. You see now why I'm known as the finest blade in the Empire. Attend my lessons next time. Before Esdeath could answer, a war horn blared. A messenger galloped into the yard, cloak billowing, breath coming in ragged gasps. Sir Charles! Captain Esdeath, she's gone! Charles's blood ran cold. Gone? What do you mean gone? Jenny clutched his arm. We've scoured every building, every barracks wing, no sign of her since dawn. Send out more scouts, Charles ordered, voice tight. Every road, every hidden cove, find her. He turned to Ivan, the shipwright turned sailor. Search the docks, question every captain. No vessel leaves harbor without my say. Hours later, a tired Ivan returned, his face grim. Young master, what if Captain Esdeath sailed off with General Barrett himself? Charles's heart pounded. He stared down at the polished floor, determination hardening in his eyes. One way or another, he would bring Esdeath home. Charles leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Are you saying Barrett has taken Esdeath? Ivan hesitated, then nodded. Boss, it lines up. Esdeath vanished the moment Barrett sailed away. But knowing Barrett, I doubt he'd voluntarily bring her along, unless she stowed away on his ship. Ivan tapped his tablet, finger racing over the screen. I'll call Barrett at once. We'll see if Esdeath is with him. Charles waved him off and sank back into his chair, running a hand through his hair. He'd always thought Esdeath the model of obedience, yet here she'd gone missing under his watch. He let out a low growl. Damn it! He struck the tabletop so hard it splintered beneath his palm. 2 days. It had taken him 2 days to notice his daughter was gone. If someone intended to spirit away their own child, wouldn't they see it immediately? By the time he realized, days had slipped past, enough for any ship to disappear into the endless blue. Who could track them now? Then a sudden spark of hope lit in his mind. Life card. The rare New World device. If anyone could pinpoint Esdeath's whereabouts, it would be that. He rose from his chair, resolve hardening. Now there was still a chance to find her, if he moved quickly enough. Charles realized life cards wouldn't be difficult to craft, and he dove right into organizing them. Just then, Ivan came running back, breathless with excitement. "Boss, I've got news. Real news this time. Missy's officially on the expedition team." Barrett confirmed she slipped into the supply crate and hid there so no one would notice. No sooner had Ivan left with that information than he returned, rushing up to Charles again. Chapter 218, The Naval Battle Concludes. Charles strode into the salon in a fury. Lawless, absolutely lawless. Does she still see father in her eyes? He'd just learned that Esdeath had slipped away again, and the teacup in his hand shattered on the floor. "Young master, we have to save Esdeath," Jenny cried, dropping to her knees beside the broken china. "He's only 16. How can he survive the battlefield alone?" Jenny, Charles's devoted attendant, had never looked more frightened. "Calm down," Charles said, kneeling to gather the fragments. "With Admiral Barrett in command, Esdeath will be safe. Even if he shows up among the ranks, it won't change the outcome. Let's wait for their report." He rose and placed a reassuring hand on Jenny's shoulder, then drew her into a gentle embrace. "When he returns, he's grounded. No more unauthorized missions. You know his stubborn streak is all your fault. Your watchfulness lapsed." Charles's stern gaze brought fresh tears to Jenny's eyes. She bowed her head and sobbed, and he felt a pang of guilt. Softening his tone, he stroked her hair. "I'm sorry. We'll get him back together, I promise." On another deck, Admiral Barrett snapped the comm channel closed. All around him, splintered masts lay scattered like matchsticks. Broken rigging trailed through the water, and overturned gun carriages littered the deck. The once mighty enemy fleet had been routed. Not an opposing sailor remained to raise a weapon. Across the battered decks of the Rockefeller pirates, officers and crew gathered in ragged ranks. Wounded and exhausted, they nevertheless stood at attention, eyes bright with hard-won triumph. Barrett surveyed the scene, pride swelling in his chest. The naval battle had ended decisively in their favor, but even in victory, his thoughts turned to the one stowaway, still unaccounted for. Esdeath. "Missy's already engaged the enemy. We need to reinforce her immediately." Carter, who'd been shadowing Charles, sprang to his feet. "If we don't back her up now, she won't be able to hold on." A wave of agreement rolled through the command circle. Admiral Barrett gave a curt nod. "All warships, shift course and provide direct support to Missy at once." As the fleet mobilized, Charles pressed forward on the battlefield, chest heaving. He came face to face with the enemy general, steel flashing in each of their grips. The general allowed himself a half-smile. "Well done, young man. For your age, your swordsmanship is extraordinary. If you keep improving, I may soon find myself outmatched. You remind me of the rumored heir of the world's greatest swordsman." Charles narrowed his eyes. "Don't flatter me. I'm no one's heir. I'm just Charles." With a fierce roar, he lunged, his western blade sweeping in a blinding arc. The strike landed before the general could brace himself. A thin line of blood welled along the man's forearm as Charles's blade nicked cleanly, yet the general barely winced. He merely flicked a cursory glance at the cut, then lifted his gaze to survey the wider battle. The situation was beyond salvage. With the climactic clash against Esdeath concluded, pirate vessels had closed in on them once more. All around, men fell by the dozens, soldiers of the 8-nation Allied forces and pirates alike. Aboard the Allied flagship, nobles cowered below decks, petrified by the sight of pirates boarding, every last soul convinced the battle was lost. Clang! The general's massive sword clattered to the deck. "I surrender," he bellowed. There was no hope left. Even if he slew that little girl, Esdeath, his fate was sealed. Better to live on in chains than die pointlessly on the field. "Coward!" Esdeath snarled, her eyes blazing. "Is that how you honor your sword? Take it up again. Stand and fight. Defend your name as a general." Her fury only grew when she saw him cower. "I see no hope in this battle if even you cannot stand your ground." The general's shoulders slumped. "Our reinforcements, they'll never make it here in time." Esdeath's eyes narrowed. The general spun on his heel and peered through a gap in the smoke. On the horizon, the emblem of the Rockefeller pirates drifted steadily nearer. "How is that possible?" he murmured. Esdeath let out a low curse, turning her back on him. The die was cast. There was nothing left but to watch the enemy flagship glide into position and wait for the final blow. "Lower your weapons. Do not resist." The general's command rang out across the deck. In an instant, the soldiers dueling with the pirates exchanged wary glances, and then, with a metallic clatter, dropped their rifles. Mercenaries, after all, fought only for gold, not for the crown. The pirates pursuing Esdeath let out a collective sigh of relief. Suddenly, a thunderous boom announced the arrival of another ship. Blood slick and unbowed, Esdeath stood at her vessel's prow, peering at the boarding gangplank. "Milady!" the newcomers cried as they clambered aboard, startled by the scene before them. Esdeath swept her gaze over the deck. "This area is secure," she reported, voice steady. "These prisoners have surrendered. What are your orders?" She straightened her shoulders, striving to mask her exhaustion. Behind her, Barrett, Carter, and Isaac exchanged uneasy looks. In past engagements, they'd shown no mercy, killing captives and tossing them overboard to avoid complications. Yet none dared suggest those measures now, not in the presence of Milady. "Milady," Barrett began hesitantly, searching her face for a clue. "Any thoughts?" Carter glanced around at the soldiers and raised an eyebrow. "My thought? Put every one of these prisoners to work on Kamei Island. Didn't Uncle Wolf say the labor camps are running short on men? Well, here's our labor force." Esdeath surveyed the 60 or 70 captives standing in neat lines behind Carter. She gave a single nod. "A sound plan, Captain." A ripple of agreement swept through the ranks. "Well said, Miss Esdeath," the soldiers chorused. Barrett stepped forward, laying a gentle hand on her shoulder. "By the way, word has already reached Commander Wolf. He's ordered us to escort you back to the main camp. No more frontline duty for you in the next assault." Esdeath's eyes flared. "Father's already heard about my sortie. Who ratted me out?" She swept her gaze over Carter, Wolf, Paul, and Isaac, but each avoided her stare. Clenching her fists, she straightened her posture. "I can't accept that. The war isn't over until we've shattered their kingdom. I won't stand aside now." With that, Esdeath pulled free from Barrett's grasp and braced herself for the inevitable clash of wills. Esther's struggle was hopeless. Barrett's hand clamped down on her shoulder so firmly that any attempt to break free was pointless, and even Esdeath's devil fruit powers were useless against his grip. "Bring her to the captain," Barrett ordered. Paul stepped up, grinning as he took Esther from Barrett's hand. Around them, the crew snickered at her predicament. "Humph." Esther folded her arms and pouted, refusing to meet Paul's teasing wink. He didn't mind her sulk. After all, he'd known her since she was a child and had even taught her swordsmanship for a time. "All right, everyone," Paul called out, turning to the officers gathered on deck. "We go on the offensive now. Our alliance's leader is the Kingdom of Rommel, and that's exactly where we'll strike first." Chapter 219, Rommel Kingdom. Esdeath had been taken long ago. What was really stolen from her was her passionate heart. Damn Barrett and his betrayals. Now she stood on the deck of a pirate ship, her western sword flashing as it cleaved through the salty breeze. Each stroke rang with a crisp hiss that echoed across the planks. Wounded swordsmen and their fresh escorts alike pressed in around her, eyes wide as they watched every arc of her blade. Esdeath had been trained by Charles, formerly Charlotte, the world's foremost swordsman, and as his daughter, she'd clearly inherited every ounce of his legendary skill. If anyone could decipher even a fraction of Charles's techniques from her display, they'd pay a king's ransom for it. Captain Paul watched the scene with a rueful shake of his head. He ignored the crowd's murmurs of astonishment and kept his gaze firmly on Esdeath. This fierce, unforgiving girl shared her father's ruthless temper, and he couldn't afford to look away, not for a single moment, or she might slip through his grasp and vanish into the sea mist. Estes had been seized on Barrett's orders, and Barrett himself had mustered every available swordsman before marching straight for the Rommel Kingdom, heading for the very gates of Rommel Palace. "Report, Your Majesty, the news from the front is dire. The 8-Nation Alliance Navy has been destroyed, and the Rockefeller pirates are bearing down on the kingdom." A soldier burst into the throne room at a full gallop, his voice echoing through the corridors long before he reached the dais. Court officials and military ministers froze in their seats. Even the messengers waiting outside the hall fell silent. The soldier knelt abruptly before King George. "Your Majesty, what's happening at the front?" Your Majesty, the Rockefeller pirates dispatched Douglas Barrett, known as the Devil's Heir, at the head of 15 pirate fleets. In a single stroke, they obliterated the 8-nation alliance navy. The soldier bowed his head so low his forehead nearly touched the marble floor, trembling at the thought. Over 50 warships of the alliance were sunk by those 15 pirate vessels. King George's face went pale. 15 ships against 50. How could this have happened? A heavy silence fell across the throne room as the assembled nobles and generals struggled to process the scale of the calamity. Outside, the distant roar of cannon fire reminded them that the kingdom's fate now teetered on the edge of barbaric steel and ruthless ambition. Is this how your navy guarantees our security? King George's voice thundered through the great hall as he flung his teacup to the floor. Porcelain shattered, echoing the fury in his tone. Your Majesty, please, a trembling minister began, but the king cut him off with a glare. Please. George snarled, rising from his throne. His robe swept the marble dais as he strode before the gathered court. Do you dare tell me to calm down after this disgrace? All at once, every noble and official bowed their heads. Even the rows of naval officers at the rear seemed to shrink, unwilling to meet the king's burning eyes. After a tense moment, Lord Harrington, First Minister of the Crown, stepped forward. His voice, though steady, carried the weight of urgency. Your Majesty, if I may offer a course of action, issue an immediate royal decree appointing General Churchill as Commander-in-Chief of all royal forces. He will marshal our armies to repel the Rockefeller pirates. At the same time, we should petition the world government for aid and formally request entry into their alliance. General Churchill, stationed at the forefront of the military delegation, watched Harrington with a mixture of surprise and inner exasperation. In his mind, he cursed the sudden burden of this high office, but outwardly he bowed respectfully, awaiting the king's next command. Your Majesty? Harrington prompted, echoing the hush that had fallen over the chamber. King George paused, his chest heaving with anger, and the court hung on his every breath. How can a frail, ailing minister hope to command soldiers as fierce as wolves and tigers? Churchill's voice rang out across the great hall. We need youth and vigor on the front lines. I propose we send General Howell. Let him lead our forces and destroy the pirates. A hush fell over the assembly. All eyes swung toward Howell, the once overlooked general who habitually lingered at the back of the ranks. Now, under the flicker of torchlight, he felt every nobleman and minister scrutinize him. King George, seated high on his throne, watched the turmoil below in silence. Long seconds passed before he spoke, his calm, measured tone cutting through the tension. Prime Minister, the king said, turning to Churchill, you also suggested we appeal to the world government for aid. Do we know whether they will answer our call? Churchill clenched his jaw, uncertainty flickering across his features. Your Majesty, I cannot say for certain. The king's gaze hardened. He had often tolerated the prime minister's cautious methods in times of peace, but this crisis brooked no delay. Rising from his throne, George addressed Churchill directly. Sir, you are not merely my advisor. You are the kingdom's commanding general. Our realm teeters on the edge of ruin. I will not tolerate more half-measures. Eat your words of doubt and act. A heavy silence followed as Churchill bowed his head and Howell stepped forward, resolve hardening in his eyes. The fate of the kingdom now rested on their shoulders. Chapter 3. The New General. The Grand Council chamber of Rommel Castle buzzed with uneasy tension. Merchants haggled over hastily assembled provisions, nobles whispered about securing their fortunes, and ministers cast anxious glances at one another. A heavy hush fell as King George's footsteps echoed through the hall, and he mounted the dais. Silence! He commanded, unrolling a crisp parchment on the marble table before him. Chancellor Churchill rose at once, prepared to speak, but the king brushed past him without a word. His gaze settled on a young courtier standing at the back, Charles Howell, a name unfamiliar to most. A ripple of surprise ran through the assembled nobles. Charles Howell, King George announced, voice ringing against vaulted ceilings. By my decree, you are appointed general of the realm. You will command our armies and drive out the pirates ravaging Rommel's shores. The safety of this kingdom now rests upon your shoulders. This council is dismissed. Without waiting for protest, the king strode from the chamber. Churchill pounded the table in fury, but his objections went unheard. Almost at once, chaos erupted. Whispers of, "It's hopeless," and "Gather your treasures," swelled into frantic shouts as nobles and merchants scrambled to the exits, hauling chests of gold and wagons laden with silver. Beyond the council doors, the castle's corridors teemed with panicked families and servants, all rushing toward the port. Cathedral bells tolled the alarm, and through the windows, dark sails appeared on the horizon, an ominous reminder of the pirate threat closing in. Alone on the dais, Charles Howell steadied himself with a hand on the polished balustrade. He was no celebrated hero. Most had never heard his name until this morning. Yet the royal edict was clear and irrevocable. He drew in a deep breath as the first watchman's horn sounded from the ramparts. The fate of Rommel lay in his hands, and Charles Howell would see it defended. Pirates of the Rockefeller fleet are about to invade the Rommel kingdom. The moment that warning swept through the city, the already unstable kingdom erupted into all-out chaos, and this time, blood was shed. Local gangs seized the opportunity to run rampant, looting and terrorizing the streets. Even Churchill's plan to hold the city walls collapsed. With civic order in ruins, no defense could stand. Soldiers, lured by the promise of easy plunder, abandoned their posts and joined the rioters. Before the Rockefeller pirates, led by Captain Barrett, even made landfall, a great cloud of smoke and dust had already risen above the island. Carter, Barrett's lieutenant, peered through his telescope in disbelief. "Sir, we haven't even landed yet, and look at this mess. They're tearing themselves apart already." Barrett stood tall, arms folded across his chest, his expression as cold as steel. "Our orders are clear," he replied evenly. "Eliminate every enemy. Spare no so-called merchants or nobles. We will wipe this island clean, return it to a blank slate." A hush fell over Carter as Barrett's words sank in, the captain's unspoken promise of slaughter hanging heavily in the air. He swallowed hard, then straightened his spine. "Understood, sir." Barrett's lips curved into something like a smile. "Good," he said softly. "Then let the conquest begin." All of this had been agreed upon before we set sail. Now, 12 pirate ships, each flying the infamous Rockefeller banner, glided menacingly toward the harbor. "Look out! It's the Rockefeller pirates," someone shouted. "They got here already? Damn, that was fast. Everyone clear the docks. I don't want to be anywhere near this." The moment the pirate fleet bore down on the port, pandemonium erupted. Dock workers and merchants abandoned their posts, scrambling over crates and barrels as they fled in every direction. The constant slap of waves against the pilings mixed with the clamor of frantic footsteps and panicked cries. "Fire!" Captain Barrett's roar cut through the chaos. Boom, boom, boom. The lead ship's cannons thundered, hurling shell after shell into the crowded quay. Explosions ripped through the milling crowd, plumes of smoke and debris soaring into the air as the Rockefeller pirates launched their assault. Chapter 220, 8 Kingdoms Destroyed. I, Charles, stood at the water's edge, watching flames devour the port of Rommel. Barrett and every pirate under the Rockefeller banner had gathered before the city walls. With a fierce cry, he rallied us all. Forward! Seize the Rommel kingdom! Before anyone could hesitate, Carter shifted into a massive zebra. His ebony stripes rippled as he pawed the ground, then thundered straight for the gate. A single powerful kick splintered the heavy timber, and he was off, racing up the ramparts, scattering archers like pins. Their arrows glanced harmlessly off his flanks as he tore through the defenders. Emboldened by Carter's assault, our swordsmen surged forward. Anyone within reach vaulted onto the battlements, blades flashing, cutting down soldiers caught off guard by the sudden breach. At the base of the wall, Barrett planted his hands on the ancient stones. A crimson glow flared in his eyes. "Devil form!" he roared. Violet crystals shot outward from his palms, swiftly coating a section of the rampart. The ground trembled, and from the earth itself rose a towering crystal giant, far taller than the wall. With a deafening crash, its colossal hands smashed into the masonry. Stone exploded in every direction. The battlement collapsed, burying Rommel's defenders beneath a tide of rubble. My heart pounded as I watched. A giant. Someone behind me gasped. I felt the same rush of disbelief and exhilaration. With that breach, the gates to Rommel lay open, and the fate of the kingdom was sealed. "Look, it's a giant!" At the sight of Barrett's towering form, the soldiers' morale shattered. Hands shaking, they dropped their weapons and retreated toward the battered city walls. Barrett, the colossal figure tens of meters tall, crushed the ramparts beneath his feet and strode down the abandoned streets toward the palace. Any soldier who hadn't fled in time was flattened under his gargantuan boots. Behind him, the Rockefeller pirates advanced in awe. Carter and the others exchanged envious glances. They had never witnessed power like this. Civilians, nobles, and even the palace guard paused in stunned silence. Far beyond them, King George himself stood frozen at the palace entrance, eyes wide as he beheld the impossible. "Is this the true strength of the Rockefeller pirates?" someone whispered. King George's face drained of color. Could his kingdom endure such might? Chaos swallowed the throne room, as courtiers scattered in panic, but the king remained rooted to the spot, too astonished to move. Barrett's strides were measured, neither rushed nor hesitant, as he surveyed the sprawling palace grounds. Then, with a thunderous crack, he planted one enormous foot inside the gates. Rumble. A vast swath of buildings collapsed in an instant, and countless citizens were crushed beneath the ruins. From the deck of his flagship, Charles, the young captain of the Rockefeller pirates, spotted a lone figure standing before the grand hall. A middle-aged man garbed in royal robes, the unmistakable crown of the Rommel kingdom upon his brow. Charles recognized the king at once. Without a moment's hesitation, Charles sprinted forward. In a single, decisive blow, he drove his boot through the king's chest, sending him crashing against the marble steps. The moment the monarch fell, the Rommel kingdom's fate was sealed. Less than an hour later, Charles had landed his fleet. The streets, once teeming with life, lay silent beneath the wreckage. Word of the kingdom's annihilation spread like wildfire. The Rockefeller pirates had erased Rommel in the blink of an eye. For those watching from afar, whether from cramped city windows or distant naval patrols, the spectacle was both horrifying and awe-inspiring. But Charles was not finished. At his command, the Rockefeller pirates struck again and again. Over the next few days, 8 neighboring realms, none of them prepared for the onslaught of his Titan-class Gundam, were reduced to smoldering ruins. Kings who had boasted vast armies found their soldiers shattered before Charles as his mechanical warhorse. No fortress withstood his assault, no alliance halted his advance. In less than a week, 9 crowns had fallen beneath the Rockefeller banner. The world trembled at the name of Charles, the boy captain whose Gundam cleaved kingdoms in two, and whose ambitions now stretched to every shore of the New World. The news hit like a thunderbolt. 8 kingdoms in the New World had been shattered overnight, their thrones toppled by a single pirate crew. From the grimy back alleys of dark lands to the gilded courts of the world government, shock and fury spread uncontrollably. In a grand chamber high above the capital, the 5 elder stars, legends of the world government, gathered around a long lacquered table. Reports lay scattered before them. Each one carried the same terrifying verdict. Charles Rockefeller, the upstart pirate, had not only raided those kingdoms, he'd occupied them. "Damn it!" snapped Elder Wu Laoxing, his knife glinting as he stabbed at the parchment. Have the Rockefeller pirates finally revealed their true ambitions? Elder Shun, whose deep scar ran from temple to jaw, folded his arms. His voice was calm but steely. "I warned you months ago. Charles Rockefeller is anything but content with mere plunder. Look at the aftermath. 8 sovereign realms wiped off the map. He isn't a member of the world government, yet his influence grows unchecked. He must be brought to heel." A third elder, his blonde hair almost luminescent under the chandelier's glow, leaned in. "So what's our strategy? This is no longer a hit and run. He's not looting and fleeing. He's settling in. He's claimed those territories as his own." Heads around the table nodded grimly. Pirate raids were nothing new. Countless coastlines had endured their raids, felt their steel, and watched treasure ships bite the dust. But full-scale occupation? That crossed a line even they had never seen breached. Elder Wu Laoxing tapped the table for silence. "Then it's settled. We treat this as an act of war. Assemble our fleets. Mobilize every admiral. Charles Rockefeller will learn why no one ever holds our territories forever." As the chamber doors slammed shut behind them, the world government's resolve was clear. They would not allow a pirate to rewrite the rules of power. And somewhere on the distant horizon, Charles Rockefeller's black flag still flew high, an unspoken challenge to all who dared to stop him. This threat is even more dangerous than a routine pirate raid. If a single pirate succeeds in assassinating the king, he could carve out his own realm and throw the entire world into chaos. "Deploy CP0, declared Satan, the operative with the scar running horizontally across his brow and the low-brimmed hat that shadows his face. "Send our 2 deputy chiefs. Whichever of them deals with this problem first will be promoted to chief." "The Navy's objectives are too broad for an operation in the New World," Satan continued. "CP0 can act more discreetly, with narrowly focused orders that won't draw unwanted attention." At his words, the other 5 elders, each sporting a long silver beard, fell into thoughtful silence. Finally, one of them ventured, "Do you really believe they can handle Charles Rockefeller? He's no ordinary target." Old Star Wu, who had been quietly adjusting his own hat, spoke up, his tone grave but measured. "Open warfare is the Navy's domain. CP0 exists precisely to resolve those sensitive matters you don't put on the official record." A hush followed, broken only by 4 unanimous voices offering their assent. "Agreed, agreed, agreed." Satan inclined his head once, then tapped the holoprojector before him. "It's settled. Prime Minister, authorize CP0. This matter must be resolved by any means necessary." Chapter 12. Unless we act swiftly, the alliance between the New World's nations, the 4 Seas kingdoms, and even the first half of the Grand Line will descend into chaos, warned Admiral Blanc. The fair-haired veteran officers called the 5-star blonde. Around the conference table, every face turned solemn in agreement. Vice Admiral Satan immediately began issuing orders, consulting closely with Fleet Admiral Wu Laoxing and their staff. Meanwhile, Commander Morgans flooded the newspapers with reports of the Rockefeller pirates' latest atrocities. Sensational headlines blared across every masthead. "Douglas Barrett, heir to the destroyer Devil. 8 kingdoms obliterated. The Rockefeller pirates' unstoppable rampage." On the front page, Morgans ran a massive illustration, a towering pirate lord striding triumphantly over the ruins of a shattered city, smoldering stones crunching beneath his boot. The sheer scale of the devastation was staggering, an event so monumental that even Charles, the young captain at its center, could scarcely comprehend the magnitude of what he had unleashed. Back at Marine headquarters in Marineford, a new naval conference convened, this one devoted entirely to the Rockefeller pirates. General Warring States spoke first, his voice edged with frustration. "We're powerless to stop them. In today's new world, our fleet simply lacks the strength to pursue their operations in those waters." From the Marshal's dais, Fleet Admiral Kong glared down at Morgans's damning headlines. His fists tightened on the table as the full gravity of the threat settled over Marineford like a gathering storm. Today at Marine headquarters, only Admiral Sengoku and Vice Admiral Suru remained. Admiral Hiro Garp had set off in pursuit of the Roger pirates. After they slipped through the joint blockade Sengoku and Garp had laid last time, Garp decided to chase them down on his own. Sengoku, meanwhile, returned to HQ. He'd been planning to depart for the New World immediately, but he never anticipated the Rockefeller pirates causing such a major uproar.